The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the expressed written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
Station atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized.
It's Wednesday, October 17th. Thursday, October 18th, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond. And this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host, Dave Scott, broadcasting to you live from the Great White North, on top of the mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 strong nightly on the SOR radio network at Deep Talk Radio, and we welcome you to tonight's show. Want to take a listen to our archives? They are free on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do old Davey the favor and hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can get your horns up for Mr. Bumblefoot. Pretty soon, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a brand new Spaced Out Radio store. Lots of cool swag on there coming for you. I've seen it. Looks good. Read up on the encounter online and so much more. Tonight's show is brought to you by the YouTube channel Ensuho. Sebastian Martin brings high-quality messages to the masses. Go to spacedoutradio.com, click on the Ensuho banner, and subscribe to the channel today. The third Wednesday of every month, we take a stroll down Highway 1, detouring left and right every now and again for ghosts of the Great White North. And as per usual, we are joined by the man with a very tight haircut, Mike Morin from Haunted Crew of Canada here in British Columbia. And for tonight's ghostly show, as we start to roll into Halloween, we are joined by one of the curators of the world-famous Barkerville Ghost Town. Now, I know he's probably going to give me heck for calling it a ghost town, but We've seen ghosts there. Literally, it's a ghost town, and that's what I'm calling it. James Douglas is the manager of visitor experiences and public relations for Barkerville, which really didn't become a ghost town until the start of the 1950s. It is now a major tourist destination. Now, if you're in the United States, you're going to think Virginia City in Nevada. That's what we got up here. Barkerville, Virginia City. They're about the same. Both, in their heyday, were all lit up due to the gold rush back in the 1850s. Absolutely amazing. But for some, they never left the buildings. And that's where we're going to get into some ghostly hauntings tonight. Then at the bottom of hour number 3, Olaf Phillips will be back from Paranoia Magazine with the latest edition of The Encounter from our SOR newsroom. Mr. Mike Morin, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very well, Dave. Doing very well. I'm looking forward to tonight's show. It's going to be a good one.
Absolutely. And we've wanted to talk to James Douglas for a long time, man. We really have. And James, I got a little bit of a story to start off with for you and Mike. A little bit of a ghost story. So on the Sunday of our Paracon, it was your typical British Columbia fall night where it was a mixture of rain and snow. But that didn't stop the Ukrainian Watermelon and myself and a few other guests from the Paracon going out onto the Spruce Hill Resort and Spa and 108 Mile Ranch and actually investigating a spot that had never been investigated before, which was the original Gold Rush Trail, which ran through the resort. So here we are, and we're literally 150 feet into our walk. And we, all of a sudden, there's about 8 people with us, and we all have like K2 meters and everything. Because of the weather, we weren't going to bring out any other big gear. And there's no power lines out there. There's no electronics to mess with the system. And here we are, walking up the trail, and we start getting hits on our K2 meters. And through the yes-no questions that we were asking, we found out that it was an Oriental man and wife, and they were traveling up to Barkerville. And here they were, these ghosts, talking about how they were stopping in the 108 Mile at the post house. And then they were still, I believe they figured they were a day or two away from making it to Barkerville. And it was weird because I was just up a few days previous to this, up in Barkerville, shaking hands with you and letting you get to know David Weatherly, Ross Allison, Grant Cameron, while they looked around the museum, which is absolutely stunningly beautiful. And here we have these ghosts on their way up there. It was absolutely insane. So here we are, we're talking to them for about 10 minutes, asking yes-no questions, trying to get all the information. And we're standing in the middle of the trail, dumb bumpkins. Hey, that was awesome. That was absolutely cool. Look at that. Like, we got action right off the bat. And we told them, we said, thank you for your time. You guys can continue on your trail. But they weren't leaving. And then we figured out why. Because I was at the back of the line, or at the front of the line going up the trail, and my meter kept going off. And that's when I figured out they actually had a horse and buggy with them. So we got all 8 of us to kind of spread off the path so this couple could move their horse and buggy down the trail. And one by one, you saw the K2 meters blip and then go off, blip and then go off, blip and then go off. Like they were leaving, going up the trail towards the 108 and then eventually Barkerville. So that's the way I wanted to start tonight off, with a little cool ghost story that involved you guys that you don't even know about.
Well, that's pretty incredible, and it just speaks to that whole movement of people. I mean, it makes so much sense. Over a number of different decades, you would have had this migration of people coming up from the southern reaches of BC up into the mountains, looking for that elusive treasure. Lots of people found it, lots of people didn't. But what a great way to start this conversation this evening, by joining those people on their journey.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, Mike had to go. He had other engagements, so I had to take over the tour for him. But Mike, you missed out. You completely missed out on that.
I did. That sounds like a good story, and I wish I was able to experience that. And you say that was on the old wagon trail, eh?
Yeah. So, when you pull into the Spruce Hill Resort, it's a gravel road. and you pull in, and then you go over, and a lot of people may laugh, but you have to go over a cattle guard in order to get there, because the resort is on a free-range cattle ground. And then there's the first trail on the right. You know, the one I was showing you.
Yeah, I recall that one.
That's where it was. That's where it happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was really kind of cool to have that experience so quickly, you know, after seeing you guys. Mike, let's, before we get too into James just yet, because he is the star of the show tonight, let's remind everybody about you. You're with Haunted Crew of Canada out here, British Columbia. Introduce your team. Tell everybody what you do.
I am. My name's Mike, as Dave said. I'm part of the Haunted Crew of Canada, and we're a team of 5 investigators. There's me, Jay Jordan, Blair Jordan. They're kind of a husband-wife duo. Jeff Webster, and we use medium Derek White Sky Cloud. And we have been very active with investigations throughout British Columbia and Washington. We're working with a company right now to help put some episodes together. We're rolling with 2 producers right now, and I'm actually going to go meet with them tomorrow and discuss some of our locations that we have already filmed and see what they can do to make us some episodes. It's pretty cool. Can't wait to show them.
Right on. And you know James a lot longer than I have. I've only had the privilege to meet James twice. But why don't you introduce our guest tonight?
This is James Douglas. I met him in 2015. I met him. I worked with one of the girls who lives up in Barkerville, and she caught wind of what I was doing, paranormal investigating. I'm super into British Columbia history, and she's like, have you ever been to Barkerville? I'm like, absolutely have. Growing up, I used to go at least once a year with my family. And she's like, you should investigate up there. And she's like, I'm going to introduce you to James. I'm like, please do. And I met James through email, then a phone call, and then we scheduled an investigation up there with the team I was a part of then, and the rest is history. Here we are now.
And Barkerville is a huge, huge place for Americans and Canadians, and about 70 to 80% of our audience is American, and they have absolutely no clue, Mr. James Douglas, how important Barkerville was to the American community back in the 1850s when the gold rush hit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you consider, like, gold was the official announcement of the discovery of gold on Fraser River came out in 1858. Although the forming British government that was here had known about the gold since 52, but they knew that they needed to create as solid a colonial infrastructure as they could, because they knew that a lot of American gold miners who were sort of, you know, in the sort of sunset days of the California gold rush, the heads, the sort of the height of that gold rush was 1848 and 49 out of San Francisco. So by the early 1850s, they're hungry and they're looking for new places to go, and it's a migration of people. I mean, if you look at the names and the rosters of all of these different gold rushes coming from California to the Fraser, and then up into the Caribou in the 1860s, then on to the Cassiar, back down to Arizona, and then up to ultimately up to Alaska. You see the same names because it is this group of people who are just basically following the rushes to get what they can out of the resource extraction that they're doing. So by the time Williams Creek, which is the creek that runs through Barkerville, it was discovered in 1861 in sort of the heart of what we now call the Caribou Gold Fields. By the time people were getting up here, they were really looking for the coarse nugget gold. They've been finding lots of flour gold down on the Fraser, but they wanted to come closer to the source. And it turned out that this area was the source of that gold through the quartz in all of the mountains in the area. So the American population here was huge. I mean, it really was probably other than the Chinese, which was probably the single largest represented group during the gold rush. I would say that probably Americans were next, even though it's a British colony. Primarily the population, there were a lot of British people here, but the Caucasian population was primarily American.
Interesting. I never knew that. And James, with that, let's introduce you. You have been involved in Barkerville, I believe, for about 20 years now. And
Absolutely, yeah.
What made you get involved with this historic town? Tell us a little bit about you getting involved in Barkerville in general.
Sure. So Barkerville now is the largest historic site in Western North America. There's 140 restored wooden buildings. 107 of those buildings are the originals, dating anywhere between 1869 and about 1940. And it's a living history museum. So the administration in Barkerville hires professional actor interpreters, as they're called, to dress in period costume and deliver a whole variety of different educational programs to the visiting public. So we're open May to September every year for the main season. We have an outdoor rec-based winter activities season as well. But our main sort of hustle and bustle, where we see the bulk of our tourism traffic, happens between May and September. We see an average of about 60,000 people a year, and they take tours with costumed interpreters. They check out the blacksmith and see some real traditional metallurgy at work. We have an operating antique printing press in the Caribou Sentinel newspaper as well. There's schoolhouse lessons, a variety of different scenes that occur throughout the course of the day that give a little bit of instruction of certain historical elements. We have a fully functioning 15-foot Cornish water wheel, which is a giant mining engine that was used to pump water out of the ground, as well as operate the winch, the hoisting engine, and then sluice the gold. It's how they would wash the gravel off of the gold and look for the gold nuggets that were coming up out of the mines. So there's a fully functioning replica of one of those water wheels that you can see in operation. Throughout the course of the summer season, we have employed on site at any one time more than 100 people. There's 18 period businesses in Barkerville that offer all sorts of different things that people can buy that are authentic to a variety of time periods. And it's just a very incredibly vibrant place to come and spend some time. And so back in 1998, this is actually my 20th season that I've been year that I've been associated with Barkerville. I was a working actor, and a friend of mine named Charlie Ross, who had been working up here for a couple of summer seasons. We had gone to university together in Victoria. He just kept telling me how much fun I would have if I came up and worked with him actually on the water wheel. For that season, they were looking for an actor to replace somebody who'd moved on to another location. And so I finally came up and instantly fell in love with the place. I mean, I had trained as a theater actor. I was primarily interested in musical theater at the time, but I had never encountered a place like this where the real bare bones of the things that we were learning in theater school were really kind of peeled back, and it was kind of like going back to, when you're a kid. And you can spend like all day acting out, either the plot of a movie or a book that you like, or you're improvising a story with your friends, and you take on characters, and you can just spend time in that world all day long. Unlike traditional theater, which sort of allows you to have that immersion for anywhere between an hour and 3 hours a night, here was Barkerville, where we were putting on characters, historically based characters, so there was a lot of interesting research to be done, but we were interacting with people 7 hours a day in character, and providing a little bit of a segue between our current lifestyle and time period and some of the stuff that was going on in the past. And I had never experienced theater like that before, and instantly just knew that I wanted to keep coming back. So I found a number of reasons over the next 6 or 7 years to come back every summer and spend 5 months out of my year here in Wells and Barkerville, and then ultimately met my wife, and we moved on and did a few things, and always said if we had kids, this is where we would like to come back to. And in 2009, our twin daughters were born at the end of January. In May, there was a posting for at that time a marketing and communications officer. I threw my hat into the ring, and by July we were here, and we've never left. And so now, I've moved on. Actually, a couple of times. I was the manager of visitor experiences and public relations for about 9 years, and then more recently, that job is starting to evolve into something that we're calling the director of public programming and media development.
Mike? This is where Mike always gets his mute button
Hello?
stuck. This is where Mike... Yeah. Where did Mike go? Did he hang
Mike
up
is here. Mike's Skype was making a loud buzzing noise where I couldn't hear the last thing James said, but yes. So my Skype is acting up right now. Can you actually hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, bud. We can hear
All right.
you. You're coming through fine. So just roll with it and we'll make it happen.
All right. You sound like you're in a pool, but that's okay. I will just ask questions. No, I just want to know, James, did you ever work in the theater, like actor in the theater, like do all the jobs there? Go through the
At the Theatre Royal here in Barkerville, or just theater in general? I did start out as a stage actor, but I've done everything from directing to stage managing to dramaturgy. And here at the Theatre Royal, a couple of seasons, I was a relief stage manager for them in the fall, so I got a chance to spend a lot of time in that theater and hang lights and do all sorts of things. But I also regularly now, for the past 4 years, I guess, my wife, Danette Boucher, wrote a one-man show for me called The Fred Wells Show, which is about the development of the town of Wells in the 1930s, which is only 7 kilometers outside of Barkerville. It's where we all live now. And sort of the continuation of that gold rush story as it moved from the placer mining history of Barkerville into the more modern lode or hard rock mining of the 1930s through to the 1960s here. So I do a one-man show and every Thursday during the summer season at Barkerville, because the Theatre Royal cast needs to take a day off during the week. The Newman and Wright Theatre Company have me come in and do the Fred Wells Show on Thursday. So for the last 4 years, every week for about 5 months, I've had the amazing opportunity of being on that stage in the Theatre Royal.
James, I want to ask you in regards to the tourist attractions there, because you are literally about 8 hours drive north of Vancouver, barring a couple of lefts and rights. That's a hell of a push for a lot of people to go for a tourist attraction. Yet here you are in the middle of nowhere of the province, almost at the central point of the province, where everywhere you look is trees and mountains. And everywhere you go, you have to watch out for wild animals because you never know what's going to come walking down the main street of Barkerville. How do you get people up there?
Well, we're very fortunate in that there's been positive word of mouth ever since Barkerville became, and even before it became, a protected park. The town itself was officially founded in 1862, and by the 1950s, there were, still a collection of people who were living in Barkerville. So sort of to that ghost town thing that you were talking about at the top of the show, technically never, although it seems to be full of ghosts, it never was technically a ghost town, because the people who lived there in 1958 were the ones who petitioned the government to take on Barkerville as a legacy project, because W.A.C. Bennett at the time was looking for things, because it was the centennial of British Columbia becoming a crown colony in 1858. So in 1958, they decided to basically adopt Barkerville, because the people who were living there knew that this amazing historical resource was just literally falling into back into the forest. I mean, all of the buildings are made of wood. We get an average of 28 feet of snow here in the wintertime, and the weight of all of that snow tends to break old buildings pretty good. And they knew that they needed some help to properly save and then ultimately restore the town. And that's when the government got involved. And originally it was a provincial park, Barkerville, for many years. And then it moved into the Heritage Branch. So we're overseen by the Heritage Branch of British Columbia now. But it has sort of always been a living, breathing place. Some of the people who had petitioned to make it a park stayed living in the park until finally they either passed away or moved away. The last surviving original Barkerville resident was a fellow named Wilf Thompson, who lived in the park until 1979, and by then it was a going concern as a tourist destination. So it's been an interesting journey for Barkerville. Now over the last 50 plus years, it's been I mean, really, it's been a museum and a historic site longer than it has been, or than it was, a going concern during the original gold rush. But at the same time, it's still just sort of a continuation of that story. And I think that those of us who are fortunate enough to find ourselves living and working in the area share a lot of traits with those original gold miners that were coming up here 150 years ago. I mean, we're looking for different things, but ultimately, those of us who stick around, I think, do so because we found the same kind of sense of peace and awe that is up here. It is a remarkable thing. So we have all of this goodwill, 150 plus years of people kind of knowing about Barkerville. We're on the route to Alaska as well. So a lot of our U.S. visitors are taking that, that once in a lifetime or even a few times in a lifetime trip up to Alaska, and they do pop in. Because the relative we are in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we're 81 kilometers or about 50 miles from Quesnel, which is the sort of next largest center. So, the fact that you actually have to really want to come to Barkerville to get here is a bit of an Achilles heel, but it's also one of our biggest selling features, because the people who do come here, they have an interest, and it's obvious, even if it's just a small passion, it's enough to get them to make that, extra 160 kilometer or, 140 mile round trip, just to see what it is that we've got going on here. So that's been wonderful, because the people that we meet, they all have they come from different places, and they all have different interests, but there was still something, that brought them here. We do as much marketing as we possibly can, but it's the heritage field. There isn't a lot of budget dollars to go around for that sort of thing. A lot of our U.S. contemporaries, Colonial Williamsburg, for example, they have much larger budgets than we do to be able to properly market, and they see a lot more people out of the year as a result of that. But we're pretty fortunate, given the resources that we do have and the support that we have from both the province and from the local community. Really helps us spread the word as best we can. But we're always interested in getting our message out to new audiences, because there is this amazing treasure. And even if it's not the history that turns you on, the absolute splendor of the natural beauty around here, the trails and the hiking and the mountain biking, there's something for everybody here. So it's really great to be able to get that message out, so that people might want to take an opportunity to take a little closer look at us and actually make this adventure. Because you're right, it's about an 8-hour drive from Vancouver. It's a beautiful drive, though, and you get a chance to see a little slice of everything that British Columbia has to offer: deserts and canyons and rainforests and the whole deal. And it actually, for some people, they don't mind making the drive up all in one go. Some people like to break it up, stay at the 108, for example, or Spruce Hills. Along the route, it makes for a nice 2-day journey for sure. And it really is tracing that route of so many of those initial pioneers that were coming up through the area. So you really get a real flavor for just a little bit of the hardship and adventure that they were going through to get here, a century and a half ago.
Barkerville, paranormal aside, all that stuff, is probably my top 3 favorite places to go. I think I've been there every year, except for last year I didn't go. Previous to that, I usually try to go once a year. Next year, I'm going to be bringing my daughter up there to experience Barkerville. She needs to come check it out. The vibe up there is fantastic. The history is fantastic. And the way their interpretive actors act out, you basically walk into a time machine once you walk through the entrance doors, in my opinion.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because that's what we hope.
Let me ask you in regards to this, in regards to the history of Barkerville, James, how violent of a town was it? Because going back to the 1850s, the Northwest Mounted Police were just getting established, eventually turning into the RCMP. And there was a lot of lawlessness up here at that time, because no police, nobody really regulated anything. Tell us about the violence of the community back then during the gold rush.
Well, it's interesting because it's certainly not what people would expect it to be, especially if you're used to tales of the California gold rush, because there certainly was a lot more violence that occurred there. And part of the reason for that was because the miners got to the area in around Sacramento and then ultimately San Francisco before the government did. So they got there, they set up settlements, they started making their own rules, and then the government came in after the fact and started changing those rules on them. And that's where you got sort of the clash between the working people and the governing class, and you've got the rise of things like vigilance committees and things. It's also a much different scenario in California. The weather is much better, so the mining season is much longer. The gravels that you go through are much shallower, so it was easier for people to steal claims and things, so that violence erupted there. I mean, I'm not saying that there wasn't violence in British Columbia, but it was during that period between 1852 and 1858 that James Douglas, the governor at the time, ironically his name is the same as mine, but he was really working to make sure that by the time the miners started coming into the area, because it's a small community at that point. I mean, there's thousands of First Nations, of course, who live in British Columbia. But if you're looking at sort of the colonizing force, at that time it's the tail end of the fur trade, and the Hudson's Bay Company is sort of in control of what became British Columbia. And so there's only, a few hundred of those people. But as soon as news of the gold hits, you start getting boatload after boatload of people coming up from the United States through Victoria and then making their way over to the mainland. And those boats, could hold like close to 500 people at a time. So when the very first boatload of people left or got onto the docks there in Victoria in the spring of 1858, it instantly doubled the population of Victoria. And then there was a boat after that and a boat after that. Like 23,000 people came by boat in that one season, 1858. Another 7,000 came overland. So there's 30,000 people suddenly just exploding all around. And they're looking for, some way to find their fortune. So if you've got all of those people in an area like this, of course, there's going to be some violence that erupts. But because Douglas and his cohorts had an opportunity to kind of build a system in place that made it easier for people to follow the rules once they got here, because the rules were already in place, it actually made for a much more peaceful gold rush than you would have expected. They also did some smart things when Judge Matthew Bailey Begbie first got here in 1858, the Chief Justice. He spent 2 years interviewing all of the miners in the camps that he would go to, and then the results of those interviews ultimately made their way into the Goldfields Act, which basically allowed the miners themselves to create some of the rules along with the government. So they really felt that they were being respected. So, but again, there was definitely violence. And in a place like Barkerville, I can think of a couple of stories where people were dragged out into the street and either stabbed or shot. There were only ever 2 executions in the history of Barkerville, people who were convicted of a capital crime. Both of those executions actually took place on the same day, August the 8th of 1867. And they were both for murder. And there were some interesting stories. Like one of those 2 men was a fellow named James Barry, who murdered a guy on the road between Quesnel and Barkerville. He had palled around with a couple of people. They'd been walking together and ultimately were going to get to Barkerville. And he managed to sort of take one of the 2 guys that he was walking with away from the other when the third person had to stay in Quesnel for some business. So he walked along the trail with him and then murdered him in cold blood, shot him in the back of the head. It became a huge deal in Barkerville because nobody really understood what had happened. There was no body that was discovered. It was just that third man who'd Wellington Delaney Moses was his name. He came to town and realized that his friend was gone and instantly suspected that it was James Barry and sort of set up a bit of a citizen's investigation of his own and managed to interview enough people and get enough evidence circumstantial evidence, at least, that pointed the fingers at James Barry. So, and they were ultimately able to arrest him in an interesting fashion, which we can talk about some other time if you like. But and then he was tried and found guilty of Barry's murder. So, and then later on too, you know, in the early days of the rush, probably it wasn't so as violent because, again, people were really working hard. Like, until the town was a sprawling metropolis in Barkerville, for example, by 1865, there were 6,000 people all living along the banks of Williams Creek, which is only 2.5 miles long. And so the real sort of height of Barkerville becoming known as the largest settlement north of San Francisco and west of Chicago, that's when things were really starting to rock and roll. But even after that, in the decade after, as things started to wane, then you had, you know, fewer people around, but then also fewer eyes on the people that were around too, right? So it's a little bit later on into the 1870s and even the early 1880s that we do get some of the sort of more violent tales, especially as it gets harder and harder to get at the gold. I would imagine tensions rise pretty quickly in those sorts of areas. But there was definitely death, and even if it wasn't death through violent means, death was a constant character in the daily lives of everybody who lives here. If you go to the Barkerville Cemetery and look around at the historical section and see the names of the miners that are there, you know, the average life expectancy of somebody living and working in Barkerville was 32. I mean, certainly there were lots of people who died older, but there were lots who died younger, and there was a lot of disease because it's just pre-penicillin. You know, people didn't really know at that point what they could do to inoculate themselves against disease. So you get things like typhoid fever running through a mining camp, and the miners themselves, like if you think about it, they were doing something called hot bunking to save money. They build a small 10 by 10 cabin that have 4 beds in it. There'd be 8 men who lived in that cabin because the mines themselves, you're going down through 50 to 100 feet of gravel and working in wooden tunnels, and you can do that 24 hours a day. So there's 2 shifts of men, a 12-hour shift in the morning and then a 12-hour shift, sort of the graveyard shift. And so these guys, they'd go back to their bunks and they'd sleep for however many hours, and then they'd get up and they'd go to work, and the other shift would come in and sleep in those beds as well. So you can imagine when you've got that kind of thing going on, the minute that somebody starts to get sick, everybody gets sick. And there's gout and other things that are going on. Like, they'd wear their rubber boots 24 hours a day because they were so expensive, especially in the early years, to get up into an area like Barkerville when there's no Caribou Wagon Road at that point. They were really expensive. So people just wear their boots all the time, but their feet would be soaking wet. And so ultimately they'd get this condition called gumboot gout, which could kill you. But even if it didn't, it usually meant amputation. You'd have to cut the boots off first and then amputate the legs and hope that the infection didn't spread and kill you. But oftentimes it did. So, there were a lot of shattered dreams.
No kidding. Before they even got started.
All over the place here. Before they even got started, you're right.
James, I want to ask you, in regards to the hauntings, you've been there for 20 years. Were you forewarned at how haunted Barkerville was, or did you have to find out on your own? And tell us about your first experience.
Well, it's interesting because I have definitely had a couple of experiences myself over the past 20 years. I've talked to a lot of people, especially our security guards, our protection services officers, who spend a lot of time here by themselves or in pairs overnight. And a lot of those guys have had some very interesting stories. And of course, when I first started hearing about them, when I first got here, I just assumed that there were going to be stories. It's this incredible town that has been around for more than 150 years, right? So I knew that there had to be something. And I've always, I'm fairly skeptical. Not that I'm not a believer, because I am, but I really like things to pop out and whack me over the head before I will throw my belief 100% behind them. But I did want to ask stories of the people who'd been here. I wanted to hear some of those things. And so, I heard lots of great tales about things going bump in the Theatre Royal and the Chikuntong National Historic Site, which is one of the oldest buildings in Barkerville, which was a hospice of sorts for the Chinese community. I was really just hoping beyond hope in my first couple of years that I would have some sort of experience. And this was well before I even understood about the kinds of things that Mike's crew does. I mean, back then, there may have been on cable a haunting show of some sort, but that was not something that I had ever really encountered. So I didn't know about the equipment that you could bring in and actually sort of coax a little bit of a relationship with some of these spirits. But my first experience was not one of any sort of it wasn't an apparition. I didn't see anything, but I felt something. I think it was like 1999 or maybe 2000, probably 1999. And we had all come out in August for the annual Mid-Autumn Moon Festival, which is the Chinese festival that we do in Barkerville in August, even though traditionally the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival in the Chinese culture takes place in October. It's just too cold here to do something like that. So we do it in August as a celebration of the Chinese community. But, after the fact, we had been walking around and there's now the Nickel Hotel Museum, which is this great little satellite museum within Barkerville, the old Nickel Hotel, which is one of the original buildings. I think this one dates from the 1880s. But it at that time hadn't the curatorial display hadn't been even started. So it was actually a building that was just locked, had some artifacts in it, but it was in the process of being restored. And one of the crew that I was with that night had a key to the building. So we thought it would be fun to go in because we'd always heard that, Madam Ben Dixon, who owned both that hotel and the St. George Hotel, that there had been some potential hauntings reported at her hotels. So we thought it would be fun to go inside. And I kid you not, this was an August evening, so it was really quite warm. It had been warm all day long. I just remember us going into the building, and right in the dead center of the building, on the first floor, I walked through a space and just got instantly cold. And the temperature drop was significant and sudden. And so, I went back and I looked again at the place. And so I sort of found where it was, and I passed my hand over it and realized that, in fact, it was a column of freezing cold air that went from the floor, presumably right up to the ceiling, because it went as high as I could reach. But it was perfectly circular, like it was a tube of freezing cold air. And so then, of course, I was super curious and went outside because there was a set of stairs that went up to the second floor of the building. You couldn't access it from the inside, but you could from the outside. Went up there, and sure enough, in exactly the same spot, there was this ice cold column of air that was probably maybe like a foot in diameter. And it went from floor, again, presumably to ceiling. So I have no explanation as to what that would be. I have never experienced it since in the Nickel Hotel. And now, of course, people are there all the time because it's one of our more popular satellite museums, has the gun collection in there as well as some great clothing and stuff. But that was my first foray into, oh my God, I honestly cannot explain this. There are people here with me who are also experiencing this, so there's no doubt that something was going on. We just had no explanation as to what it was.
Amazing, man. Amazing. Mike?
I remember when you first took me in there, James, the Nickel Hotel, and you told me that story. You and I think we adjusted the camera, we opened doors, we tried to figure out if it was a draft, but no. I think you and I tried to even recreate that, but we couldn't.
Yeah.
And when we investigated later that night, we even tried with the cameras and whatever to recreate that. But no, I believe that's totally something that was paranormal. For our listeners, Barkerville, what would you say would be the top 3 haunted locations of the actual town site or areas of where people have had the most action or experiences?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as the two main stories that I heard right away when I first started coming up here, and have corroborated with several people. One of them is the St. George Hotel, and we seem to have gotten the story to the point of this may or may not be the truth of the story, but it definitely is room 2 at the St. George Hotel, which is on the second floor. If you're looking at the hotel from the main street, it's on the left-hand side of the hotel, and the window looks out onto what is now a balcony, although there wasn't a balcony there initially. So the story is that there was a woman who was working for whoever the proprietor of the hotel was at the time, whether it was Fanny Ben Dixon or the fellows that she sold it to later on, and that this as the story goes, that a woman had an affair with a man who she thought was going to marry her. He got her pregnant, and then she found out that he was already married. So she committed suicide by throwing herself out the second floor window, and fell down and presumably broke her neck on the street below. Now, again, I don't know if that's an apocryphal story or not, but that seems to be the most standard story that we hear. And very definitely people have experiences in room 2, whether they know that it's haunted or not. And some people definitely book that room because they've heard that it's haunted. And so we've definitely had some people have some expected experiences there. But there have also been people who have had no idea and who have gotten freaked out to the point where they've asked to change rooms. What those experiences are, there are legion of stories, anything from seeing somebody in the window to things moving without any provocation. So the St. George Hotel is, and I hope that they don't mind me saying this. If you want to go and have a ghostly experience in Barkerville, book room 2 at the St. George Hotel. The second one, of course, is the Theatre Royal, and that makes a lot of sense because traditionally there are always hauntings at theaters, especially older theaters that you go to. And part of that, I think, is just because of the passion that is thrown into even, what is considered to be amateur theater, which is what they considered themselves to be in Barkerville. I mean, the people who ran the Theatre Royal were citizens of Barkerville who owned mines and or owned saloons or, was the town librarian, and they got together and they formed the Caribou Amateur Dramatic Association. And it was that association that ultimately built the Theatre Royal along with the Williams Creek Fire Brigade after the Great Fire of 1868. And one of the founding members of the Caribou Amateurs was a woman named Florence Wilson, who is an incredible character. And full disclosure, my wife, Danette, plays her and has for 20 years now. In Barkerville, but that's one of the reasons why I know so much about her. But she was just an incredible person who, by complete accident, became the first librarian in mainland British Columbia because she brought a bunch of books with her, originally from England and then up from Victoria, and started lending them out to the miners who were starved for some kind of thing to, something to pass the time and some literature. And the very act of lending them out and writing everybody's names down and keeping track of the books ultimately created the Caribou Literary Institute, which was the library in Barkerville, which was the first one in mainland BC. So she was also a founding member of the Caribou Amateurs, was, from all accounts, just a tremendous actor and really passionate about the stuff that they did here. So it makes sense that if people are experiencing something at the Theatre Royal, even if it isn't Florence, that's where their minds would go to begin with. Now, perhaps there is a piece of her that is here because she moved on from Barkerville later in her life, and I think ultimately went back to England, where we've only just very recently been finding out a bit more about her post-Barkerville life, thanks to a connection with a great-great-granddaughter of hers who now lives in Australia. But who's to say that a piece of her, because Barkerville had been such an important part of her life and that theater had been such an important part of her life, that there wouldn't be a piece of her that kind of stuck around. There's been a couple of other people, like actors in the theater over the years, who have died under tragic sets of circumstances while they were not on stage, but while they were doing a run that they never got to finish. So I would presume that potentially that there's some kind of lingering there that would definitely do it. But people see and hear things at the Theatre Royal all of the time. Anything from a shadowy figure up in the balcony of the audience seats to figures that seem to be out of the corner of your eye. You see them on stage, but when you look directly at them, they're gone. And a whole slew of both people who have visited the theater as audience members, but also the people who have worked there as actors and stage managers and directors have been telling stories of the encounters that they've had there for a couple of generations now.
Wow. What's funny? What's funny is when you bring that up, when we were there a couple weeks ago with David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and Grant Cameron, I caught myself looking up into the balcony, and I even said to you guys, there's someone up there. Because you could see the outline of the person. And Ross is like, well, that's just the mannequin that's sitting up there. And I'm like, no, dude, where I'm standing, I can't see the mannequin. There is this shadow being moving back and forth. And it was weird to see because it was just like, bang, there it was.
It's oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and it kind of makes sense in a way to me, just that the historian part of me, that it would be in the upper areas of the building that you would see that, because when the Theatre Royal was originally built, now there have been 3 Theatre Royal buildings in Barkerville, all sort of built on the ashes of the other. But the original building is half of it is actually buried underneath the ground because there was all of this gravel and muck and rivers of mud that would come down every spring because there's no trees on the hillsides, and they'd have to jack the buildings up in Barkerville just to stop them from being buried. But a building the size of the Theatre Royal, you literally just cannot do that. So basically they allowed half the building to get filled up with gravel, and then they cut the top off and built another building and stuck the top of the old building on top of the new one right beside it. But but the thing is that when they initially built that Theatre Royal, it was a co-production, for lack of a better word, with the Williams Creek Fire Brigade. So the first floor of the building was actually the Fire Brigade part, and then the top part of the building was where they had a small room up there initially where they held the theatricals that they did. So they didn't have a stage quite the way that it is in this third building now, in the original one. So I've noticed that in a lot of the people's stories, it's in the upper part of the building whether it be up in the balcony or up in the flies, sort of where things are on stage. And that was the theater part of the building. So I don't know, the historian in me sort of thinks, well, it makes sense that it would be up there that you'd see something.
We only got about 3.5 minutes yet before we got to go to break.
I'd like to echo.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'd like to echo on room 2. I actually stayed the first time we investigated up in Barkerville. I stayed in that room. I experienced not much. I think it was something on the door handle trying to open it, but I can't confirm if it was paranormal or not. But I did feel really uneasy staying in room 2. And as for the theater, I remember, James, you took us into the very pit, like the bottom of the theater, and it was really uneasy. You can just feel the history in there.
And what is kind of weird is, like you said, James, I mean, back then, when the snow melted and the rivers rose and the creeks rose, the main street in Barkerville, which is slanted, actually became like a mud pit coming down, like a mudslide coming down. And I think it's amazing how even to this day you go down the main street and all the buildings are on stilts. And of course the theater was too big, so they would just chop it in half and raise it up. I mean, that's history that not many people know.
Oh, it's totally true. And you wouldn't really know until you had an opportunity to kind of see the environment. And that's what I love about it, because these buildings they've always kind of been living, breathing things. And they've been pieces of them that have been taken away to build another piece over here. And you can really see that evolution of time. But it also, it's kind of like looking at, the layers of rock when you're underneath the ground and sort of marking the dates of when things happened based on the compression of the rock. It's kind of the same thing with these buildings themselves that have been around for so long and are made of wood, not stone. So they're more easily manipulated. You can move things around as you need. You could pick up the entire building and move it across the street, as had been done many times over the generations in Barkerville. So that this continuing story, is like right in the bones of the buildings themselves.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. We got about 1 minute before we got to go to break. James, what's it like? And we're going to get more into the paranormal side right after this. But what's it like walking in downtown Barkerville on that gravel road, and all of a sudden there's a bear or a moose or a porcupine right in the middle of the road?
Well, that can be rather shocking. I mean, we're used to seeing lots of smaller rodents and things around. Columbian ground squirrels like to live in Barkerville, but when you see something like a porcupine, and that's really interesting, like especially at night, because you just sort of see this shambling shape, just off in the corner, and you're like, what is that? And when you find out that it's a porcupine, you've got to keep your distance, because those suckers can shoot those quills pretty far if they feel like they're in danger. I've only encountered bears like a few times, but I have, and one was a grizzly bear that was less than 100 meters from where I was, and that was kind of terrifying. If there's people around, we have a protocol that sees certain steps that have to be taken into account to get people out of the area and to scare the bear away. I mean, ultimately, if we have to call conservation, we would, but we do everything that we can to just kind of remind the bear that this is not a place that they want to go. I mean, I can't blame them. We've got 4 restaurants in town, so as soon as that's, they're firing up these amazing smells.
James, I'm going to have to cut you off right there, buddy. I'm going to have to cut you off right there because we got to go to break. But thank you for sharing that. James Douglas is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. He is with Barkerville Historic Town and Park. We're going to get into more ghosts with Mike Morin and James on Ghosts of the Great White North in hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio right after this.
Hello, this is your guitar man, Ron Bumblefoot Thal, and I have to tell you, I love the response I get for Little Brother is Watching from Spaced Out Radio fans. It's amazing how music can inspire and make people think deeper about what's going on in the supernatural world. You can head over to my website, bumblefoot.com, to check out my music, my guitar workshops, my touring, even check out some of the hot sauces that I'm working on. And make sure you keep on listening, because with Spaced Out Radio, Little Brother is watching.
Did you know Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi there, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm here to take you on a paranormal journey each Saturday and Sunday night. Why change the station when you have it all right here? Together, we'll hang out and share some strange and scary stories. And don't forget, we have Psychic Sundays as well, so come tune in Spaced Out Weekend. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com, where we own the night.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Hey, guess what? You can now get your brand new Spaced Out Radio swag at spacedoutradio.com. We've brought the store back with all new items for you to pick out and pick up for yourself, your family, or friends. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, we got it all. All you have to do is head to our website and click on Store. Choose what you want and it's shipped to you. The Spaced Out Radio store is right there for you. Come shop with us at spacedoutradio.com. Then we can own the night together.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are. And what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Coming soon to our website, spacedoutradio.com, is the SOR Space Travelers Club. For just $5 a month, you can get into a private area on our site where you can hang with other listeners in our chat room, post in our forum, and check out a bunch of exclusive content and store that won't be found anywhere else, including a nightly after show party with Dave. It's going to be the best $5 a month you're going to spend. The SOR Space Travelers, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for a night on the town? The Moose Vancouver is the bar that never stops rocking until 2 a.m. every night. The Moose has great food with everything on the menu from $6.95 to $8.95. Fantastic, vibrant staff and rock and roll that will bring you back to when the music was real, the hair was long, and the guitars were rocking. Get your party on at the Moose Vancouver, the official party bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, this is Geraldine Orozco from San Francisco's Bay Area Meditation. I invite you to join me the first Tuesday of every month with Dave Scott for Spaced Out Radio's The Spiritual You. In this fast-paced world we live in, it's time for you to take some time for you. We'll cover every possible subject from powerful meditation to healing techniques to your own intuition and spirituality. So come join us for The Spiritual You.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you for being with us. Tomorrow night on the show, Jamie Sexton is back with another edition of The Rebel Planet. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. Welcome back, everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio. Also, don't forget you can check out all of our archives for free at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Loquacious. Loquacious is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, space travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot. Yeah, get your horns up. We got a brand new Spaced Out Radio store coming in a couple of weeks, so just hold off on that. Read up on the Encounter Online and so much more. The third Wednesday of every month, we have Mike Morin in from Haunted Crew of Canada to talk ghosts of the Great White North, where we introduce all of our American friends and even a lot of our Canadian listeners, and all of you around the world, to the ghost stories and weird, strange events that happen up here in Canada, where we broadcast. So tonight, we got James Douglas on with us. He is one of the curators of Barkerville, British Columbia, which was a bustling gold mining town way back in the day during the gold rush. Barkerville Historic Town and Park. You can go to barkerville.ca if you want to check out their website. And if you're ever on the trail to Alaska, going up to Alaska, you have to go right by the turnoff to Barkerville. So you just do it. You just do it. You will not be disappointed. And it's a beautiful drive. Just watch out for the moose and the porcupines on the road. That's all I can say. James, Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
I have to tell you, we got a little bit of a laugh when we were driving into Barkerville a couple weeks ago, as we were actually being chased on the side of the road by a bear. A black bear was chasing us as we were going. And all of a sudden, as I'm driving, David Weatherly looks out the window and he's like, dude, there's a bear chasing us right now. And sure enough, Grant Cameron and Ross Allison look, and I look in the mirror, and sure enough, there was a big black bear chasing us down the highway. It was absolutely hilarious. But that's what happens when you have a small ghost town right in the middle of nowhere, James.
It sure is. The wildlife viewing just out the window of your car here in the summer, and especially bears are great. You can see them in the spring and the fall. There's so much. And that was really surprising to me because I was a city kid, small city, but still like growing up. And, I never in a million years would have expected that a place like Wells, which only has 250 people in it year round, would be my ultimate home. But it took a while to get used to that, the seeing of these incredible animals. And you're right. The bears are great. There's moose. You got to be careful of the moose because they can wreck your car, as I've learned a couple of times now. But we have also herds of caribou that come through it here. We're in a protected habitat for the mountain caribou. So if you're particularly lucky, like I was just the other day, a small herd of about 8 of them were out on the road, and we got a chance to see them lollygagging about the highway for a little bit and then run off into the woods. It's really, truly incredible.
Yeah, you always have to have your camera ready. You really do. I remember my first trip up to Barkerville, I was meeting Mike and his team. And this was a couple of years ago now. And I come down through, what do they call that? Devil's Corner or whatever.
Canyon.
Devil's Canyon, absolutely. Which is an incredibly steep drive, but beautiful. Wouldn't want to do that on a horse and buggy, that's for sure, like they did 100+ years ago. But nonetheless, I come around the corner after getting out of Devil's Canyon, and I'm like, what's this big black thing crawling across the road? Because I'd never seen a porcupine before. And I didn't realize they were that big. I thought maybe they were the size of a raccoon or something like that. No way, man. I almost took this thing out. It would have popped my tires. But I'd never seen that. So yeah, you always have to have your camera ready when you're going up there. And right before the break, we were talking about, bears and moose and wandering through the streets. But let's talk about the ghosts a little bit here. You get a lot of tourists every year coming in there, to wander around, and it doesn't matter where they're from because the entire Caribou region is very well known for a tourist attraction. How many people actually ask about any ghosts or hauntings?
It's interesting because there is, I would say maybe, like I have the conversation more often than I would suspect because I'm interested in the topic, right? And I've always had a soft spot for the paranormal and as I say, I'm skeptical, but I'm also insanely curious. So I'm always looking for that kind of thing. But I know that even if some people think about that, it's not necessarily something that they're going to bring up and ask questions about. It seems as though there's a small percentage of people like us who are particularly interested in and therefore are going to ask those kind of questions. But in a place like Barkerville, I have the conversation more than I would have expected. So I'd say probably about a good 10% of our audience is engaged enough in the idea of there being ghosts in Barkerville to want to ask some questions, which is pretty good.
That is pretty high. That actually surprises me. It's kind of cool too, actually.
I definitely have that conversation on a daily basis with people.
Hey, is there a real, I mean, when you mention people are asking on a daily basis, what is the real intent? Are they just asking if it's haunted, or is there actually real intrigue about the buildings that are haunted there?
I think it's definitely a mixture of both. I mean, there's definitely a lot of general inquiry, and you always get you see that sort of knowing look in their eyes as they sort of say, "So is the place haunted?" And you get an opportunity, like myself, I can say I can't tell you for sure, but these are the experiences that we've had, and we've had some great guys come out and do some real investigations, and definitely there have been recorded evidence of some kind of activity here. So that, and especially for those people who are just kind of generalists, as soon as you bring that kind of news out, then they kind of, you can just see it on their faces. But there are people definitely who ask about specific buildings, and maybe it's because they've heard about the St. George in Room 2, or they've heard about the Richfield Courthouse and the executions that took place up there. Or they're, perhaps they've learned a bit about the Chinese history and things that were happening in and around the Chikun Tong, the Benevolent Society building there. But more than people who have specific buildings in mind, there will be those people who ask, who don't know those buildings, but they ask where the sort of concentrated or the most stories are being told about. That's always really fascinating, because it's great to be able to take a bit of a break from my day and wander up town with somebody who has shown that level of interest and sort of say, okay, so when we were here 3 years ago with a camera crew, we were in that building and weird stuff happened. And then just to see the absolute delight as they go rushing into the building to see what they can find. I always get a real kick out of that.
Mike?
Yes, I was just going to say, James, let's talk about experiences that we shared together. First, Tong building. Let's talk about the Tong building, the scratches. I'll let you start with that one.
Sure. So just to give our listeners some context, the Chikun Tong is what is now called the Chinese Freemasons. Started out as both a benevolent society, as an opportunity to have a place of refuge for Chinese immigrants who are coming in to British Columbia daily and up to Barkerville on a daily basis. They needed a place where they could go and meet. But also initially that whole organization, and Chikun Tong translates to Hall of Supreme Justice. And the organization itself was founded with the idea that they wanted to, take a percentage of the gold that was being discovered by Chinese miners here in BC and send it back to mainland China. Because 95% of the population, the Chinese population here in BC, was all from a small area in Guangdong province in southern China. And they felt that there was an impending war with the northern Chinese in the Qing dynasty. So they were trying to fortify their villages, and create these cities they called dailus, which were basically battle fortresses, or like walled cities. And they were using gold that was found in California and up in British Columbia and everywhere else to make this happen. Now, ultimately, there wasn't a violent confrontation. It was a nonviolent overthrow of the government, and that's where Dr. Sun Yat-sen got involved and whatnot. But initially, that Chikun Tong organization was designed to raise funds for the potential military operation that was going to happen in southern China. Ultimately, when that didn't happen, and then they sort of went more into the community organization part of things, that's where you see the rise of what is now a thriving organization in BC right now called the Chinese Freemasons. But that building has been like the focal point, and it's one of the oldest buildings in Barkerville. Like, there's a piece of it that probably dates to before the fire, because in 1868, Barkerville burned to the ground, almost every single building, in 90 minutes. There was a fire that started at one of the saloons that had a canvas ceiling in the saloon. So a stovepipe got knocked over, sparks flew up into the canvas ceiling, ignited the roof. There was a wind that night, that just ripped the fire through every other building, and the whole place burned down. But there was so much gold here that the population immediately started to rebuild. And by 1869, the town looked pretty much the way it does now. But a piece of the Chikuntong might predate the fire, which would make it the oldest. And then it's been built on over, the generations since, but it is the oldest ethnic Chinese structure in the entire country, in all of Canada. And the amount of activity and the passing in and out of people, and it was a bit of a hostel for people to stay. There was also a Taiping peace room in the back of the property that was basically a convalescence hut, as well as a hospice of sorts. People would go there to die. There's just been this entrenched history in this building, and so when Mike and his crew came up and we wanted to focus on that building, we got the okay from our curatorial team to go in. We were pretty excited, but it kind of turned weird and a little bit almost hostile, which was very interesting, because that's not normally the feeling that we get in Barkerville, even when we do sort of have some encounters. Pretty much everything seems to be benevolent. But in this case, I remember it was Troy, I think, who had an experience that caused him to just run out of the building. And when we found him outside, he was saying that he'd been scratched, and lifted up his shirt, and sure enough, there were these red scratch marks down the sides of his body from something that he encountered in the Chikuntong.
That's true. To this date, I don't think I've ever seen somebody so scared in my life. We were just doing a standard EVP session, electronic voice phenomenon session, in not in the bedroom section. From what I recall, there's two sections to that Tong building. There's the bedroom, like the bunk beds, and then to the other side, it's like a kitchen and games room. You have games set up in there, like old-fashioned Chinese games, correct?
Yeah, like mahjong and chess and things, yeah.
So we were in that room, and when we walked in, Troy was like, "Are any of you people here?" And in my mind, I'm like, I wouldn't have said it like that. But then he's like, "Guys, it's getting really cold in here." I'm like, "It sure is." And then he was getting drawn to the corner of the building, the far corner, and he's like, "I just walked through some cobwebs." And then whoever investigates knows cobwebs, if it's not from a spider, is usually paranormal. It's some spirits or ghosts gathering energy to possibly communicate. And then all of a sudden I see him stop in his tracks. He looks around. He's like, "Guys, I gotta go." And he basically was out of there like a bull in a china shop. He literally with his hand, pushed me out of the way and ran right outside. And when he was running outside, I don't even know how he could see, because it's pitch black there. There are no lights. The only lights we have is our infrared or tiny little flashlights. And when he left, there's a sign with Chinese writing right at the entrance of the door, and that also knocked off onto the ground. But I don't know if we couldn't confirm if that was paranormal, if that was just him bolting out. And then when he got out, we turned our lights on his back area, and he flipped his jacket up, and he had on both sides of his lower back, I'd say about 6 to 8 inch scratches. It looked like 3 or 4 fingers on each side of him. And yeah, we went to where we were staying. We were staying at the St. George that night, and turned the lights on in there for more light. And the scratches, you know, when you scratch yourself and then your skin kind of bubbles or raises a little bit, it was like that on his entire back. And like James said, Barkerville's mood is usually happy, easygoing, and welcoming. but I'm thinking we annoyed something that night in there.
Yeah, you may have. You absolutely may have. So, I mean, that's kind of weird. James, had you heard of that type of experience there before, people getting scratched?
No, never. I hadn't, as I say, most of even though people get freaked out, I've never really heard stories of there being any kind of malevolent force there at all. So there was definitely something very unique to that set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, though, that the spirits know in Barkerville who is working there and who is not? Like, for instance, you say you have a crew that works there, especially some periodic actors who go in there and play the role of citizens of Barkerville back in the day with the you know, the dress and the wares that people were wearing 100 years ago in being there. Do you think, though, when a ghost group like Mike's group or any other team that comes in there to kind of, I don't want to use the word rattle things up, do you think that they're not used to it because they're used to the town being the town and people portraying characters and so on and so forth?
Yeah, you know, I think that there's a lot of truth to what you've just said there, and that makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't even profess to know what a spirit might be thinking, or even if it does think. I mean, I know there's sort of there's definitely some suggestion that it could just be impressions of things, or spirits that are stuck in a loop of some kind, maybe. But if they do have some kind of an awareness of their surroundings, then I could see very definitely that they've grown accustomed to us. Because even though, again, like I said before, like the kind of jobs that we're doing there are quite different than they were, there is still a similarity to the routine of it all, I would think. So yeah, then having these, you know, having people specifically come in who, because for the most part, most of us don't even notice the ghosts, right? I mean, we just walk along through our regular day. But if you've got a group of people that are specifically looking for them and have machines that, that are attuned to specific vibrations, in some cases giving off certain radiations, I can't help but think that there would be something very different in their experience when something like that happens. So I guess it does kind of make sense that something unique would happen during one of those encounters, simply because it's a very different experience for both sides, if that makes sense.
One thing I wouldn't mind trying, actually investigating there, is having you or some of your actors, if they wanted to help or volunteer in being in period clothes and acting out what it would have been like during that time period while we do an investigation, just to see if they would communicate with you guys, because with the costumes and all that, you guys are spot on, in my opinion, with the time period. So maybe seeing you guys would also spark maybe more conversation, or letting them know that we're there.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because you're right. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the clothing that we wear, the costumes, it's exactly the same things that they would be. So it would be a much more comfortable, I would imagine, sight for them, for lack of a better word, because it isn't so modern and glaringly different than the surroundings they're used to. I'd be into trying that for sure.
How many employees have been scared off or refused to do this when they learn that it is haunted?
I don't really know. I know that there have certainly, and I've spoken to certain employees who will refuse to go to certain places, especially at night, but sometimes not even at night. Like, there's just those places that certain people avoid, and maybe it's because they've heard stories about it or they've had some kind of experience themselves. I know for a while there was some security guards who refused to go up into the second floor of the El Dorado, which is the gold panning and gift store there, but it's one of the old barns, but from the 1930s. but that there was definitely, from stories that I've heard, multiple witnesses have seen an apparition in the upper window of that building. And I know personally a security guard who has refused to go up there ever since. I haven't heard too many stories of people kind of like picking up and leaving in the middle of the night because they've just had it with the experiences that they've had here. But definitely I hear stories of people purposely avoiding certain areas just because they don't want to even have to deal with it, you know?
James, did I ever tell you about the ghost pigs that I thought I heard in Barkerville? Pigs.
Sort of, you know, it sort of rings a bell, but you should tell me again, because any story about a ghost pig is a great story.
Truth. This was before I even started in the paranormal field. I did a road trip with my buddy to Barkerville, probably 2013, maybe even 2012, somewhere in there. Anyhow, that's not important. I was walking up the main drag of Barkerville, and where the old butcher shops, because I remember, the old butcher shop area, and I had my recorder with me, and this was before I was on any teams. I was kind of getting my feet wet, interested in this stuff, and I was just talking, walking, and then when I got home and reviewed, I heard actual pigs oinking, clear as day. Like there's no one. It was towards the. There's no one in the town at this point. It was later at the night. And yeah, I heard pigs. It was the weirdest thing ever. And I tried to recreate that when I was there in 2015 investigating, like try to get new recordings of it. I got nothing. Yeah, weird.
Well, that's very interesting because, that butcher shop area is up near Chinatown, and there's actually written record in people's journals and letters. And often people will remark from back in the 1860s of the fact that there were pigs everywhere in Chinatown. Like they were just out on the road, and they would butcher and sell the meat. And we often find remnants of that, you know, like because the gravel is unstable, like it's solid, but it's constantly moving and there's water rushing through it all the time. And so it's sort of bringing up things from the bottom. You'll often get artifacts and things that kind of rise to the surface over a number of years. And for quite some time, and honestly, around that time, 2012, 2013, we were finding a lot of butchered pig's bones that were coming up through the gravel in the main street.
That's super interesting now that you mentioned that right now. That totally clicks because that was when I was there, and it was basically like I was walking through a farm with live pigs. That's how clear it was. You could hear multiple pigs in the gravel of me walking, just gravel and pigs. I want to get that again.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I want to get to a couple of questions from our audience in the chat room tonight. I got a couple from Trip here. He is asking his first question. James or Mike, does activity pick up when people are dressed up in time period clothing in that area? James, have people experienced more when they're dressed up compared to dressed modern?
Well, you know, that's a difficult question to answer because for those of us, especially those of us who do wear costumes on a daily basis in Barkerville, I mean, we always joke about the fact that we wear Victorian clothes more often than we wear our normal clothes. But because we are always dressed that way in Barkerville, all of our experiences, except for a few, have been while we were in costume. Even that one that I talked about with the column of air, we were at the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival that night, so we were all in costume, and then we were spending some time in the park by ourselves after the fact. So that has been the bulk of my experience. But on the flip side of that, I know that I've heard a lot of stories from visitors who've come and had some kind of experience, and they would have had no access to any costuming themselves. So from my experience, it's pretty even.
All right, let's get to another question. Or Mike, do you want to answer that as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say experiment pending now, because we can try and do that at a later date. Period clothing perfect. With an investigation.
And a follow-up
that'll be great.
And a follow-up from Trip here. He is asking, James, do you think the telegraph machine works? And does activity pick up when it's on or when it's used, that clickety-clackety noise?
Well, it's interesting. I would think that it would. We don't use the telegraph often, although we are in the process of putting together. We have a working telegraph now that so in the next couple of years, hopefully by 2020, we'll have a working and operating telegraph display. So then we'll really get a chance to test that. But the telegraph plays a huge and significant role in the most famous of the murder investigations that happened in Barkerville, that one that I was talking about before, James Barry, because the telegraph was invented in 1865, and all this investigation took place in 1866. And so when James Barry finally realized that the jig was up and they had found the body of Charles Morgan Blessing, the fellow that he'd murdered, and because of Wellington Delaney Moses's citizen investigation, they had pretty much pinned it on Barry. He got on a stagecoach and booked it out of town. But the constable who was there, because it was as you had mentioned before, with the North Mounted Police that eventually became the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This was before that, and so it was a volunteer group of citizenry who became deputized constables, basically, for the force that was run by a high sheriff for the entire colony. But so this constable named Sullivan, he remembered that they had just installed the first telegraph in BC that went from Yale to Soda Creek, just north of Williams Lake. And they had literally just installed it because, it was a brand new technology. So he jumped on his horse and he rode all night long so that he could get to that telegraph. And he wired the description of James Barry to the constables in Yale. So when Barry got off the stagecoach, they were able to arrest him based on the description that Sullivan had given them. And that is the first time in recorded history that a telegraph was used as a means of apprehending a suspect in a murder investigation.
Wow. What about the hauntings, Mike? You have an interesting story. Before we get to Joe's question in the chat room, you have an interesting story from the courthouse, which is about 20 minutes walk up a gravel road from Barkerville.
Yeah. James, I don't know if you were... I'm pretty sure you were on scene at the time. I'm not sure if you were inside the courthouse, the judge's chamber, or if you were in the actual courthouse or outside at the time. But we were just about to start another EVP session, and pitch black. We just had one IR, infrared camera going. I'm basically in the middle of this dark building, and camera guy had the camera on me, and I started my EVP session. But then I kind of hear the sound of a card and then a hand thumping on a table over and over again. I'm like, uh-oh, what's Derek doing? And then I take my flashlight out and I point it at Derek. And then the camera guy comes and points his camera on Derek too. And so in the pitch black now, because I kill my flashlight and I just go look in the screen of the camera and we're just watching him. And he's doing a perfect game of what looked to be solitaire. Cards are perfectly lined up, and he's just doing that over and over again. And then, classic Mike, curiosity kills the cat with me every time. I go walk into the judge's chamber. I'm like, is this Derek or somebody else I'm about to talk to? And then the sound of the cards on the table starts to get heavier and heavier. And then I'm like, I need you to talk. Is this Derek or somebody else? And then he puts his hands heavy onto the table, like slams his hands on the table, looks up at me, and he yells, "Get the F out." And that was one of the last times I ran. I ran out of the judge's chamber, and we stopped filming, and we had to check on Derek, and he snapped out of it really quick, but he didn't have any recollection of doing the game with the cards or yelling at me.
So what makes the courthouse, gentlemen, so haunted?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. If you want to look to a historical source, the interesting thing about the executions that took place at Richfield on August the 8th, 1866, or 67 rather, they, as I mentioned, they both took place on the same day. They actually happened at the same time. And it was James Barry and a First Nations fellow named Mikkel Plask who had murdered, in a territory dispute, had murdered a couple of white miners, I think 4 actually. But the thing about it is like there is no permanent place of execution allowed in the colony at that time that would be seen by the public. So this idea of hanging trees and that sort of thing that just didn't exist as far as the British statutes were concerned. And what you would do on a date of execution is that the scaffold would be erected, the executions would take place, and then the scaffold would be burned so that it left no trace. And in 1867, the court compound looked quite different than it does now, because the courthouse that's there now at Richfield was built in 1882 after the initial courthouse, which it was just a small log building, had fallen into such disrepair that they decided to tear it down and rebuild a much more sort of classic-looking, ornate, but still wooden courthouse. But the thing is that where the executions would have taken place was in the center of the government compound at that time, which translates to roughly the center of where the audience sits now in the gallery of the 1882 courthouse. So the fact that that building is right over top of the site of the only 2 executions that ever took place there, to me, opens the door quite literally to a haunting in that building. But there's also been, successive people that have lived and worked in the Richfield surroundings, some of whom have died. I know one of the original actors who played Judge Begbie and who played Judge Begbie for 22 years. When he died, he asked that his ashes be scattered around Richfield. And so there was that happened. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that it's him who haunts the courthouse, but the fact that, that's where he wanted to spend eternity, would suggest that there is some correlation there.
Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. We're going to get to another question here. This one comes from Ron, and Ron is asking, have you found any evidence of Masonic involvement in the town, and could that be a source of paranormal activity? Now, James, I believe you are a Mason.
I am indeed, yes. Caribou Lodge number 4, which, interestingly enough, was the first Masonic lodge in British Columbia. It became Lodge number 4 once the Grand Lodges of British Columbia and Yukon amalgamated. But initially, the very first group of guys who had come up and whose mother lodge was the Tehama Lodge out of Sacramento, California, came up and started the very first Masonic organization in Barkerville. So I'm both a good person to ask that question to and not a good person to ask that question to, because I have, because of my experiences as a Mason, I have a very different view of the conspiratorial nature of a lot of people's belief and study of Masonic tradition. So I don't necessarily think that there would be anything from my experience that would make spectral activity any more or less apparent simply because there's Masonic activity in the area.
Mike, have you noticed anything around the Masonic building, even though you haven't gone in there?
I personally haven't had any experiences around the Masonic building. I'm just looking at the photo I posted on the thread on Facebook, and it has the Masonic building in it. I'm just looking at this. It's basically across the street from the St. George, yeah?
It is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I've only had experiences on that side of the street.
Weird. Why do you think, Mike, that you've only had experiences on one side of the street in Barkerville?
Just in that photo, because of the Masonic building. Actually, thinking about it right now, every experience I've had is on the St. George side, because the the Tong buildings on that side, the Barkerville hotels on that side. Technically, I guess the Richfield Courthouse would be on the other side, but I don't know. And the theater's on the side of the St. George Hotel as well.
All right,
it's true. Now that you mentioned that,
go ahead.
Oh, just that. I just I hadn't really thought of that either, but now that you mention it, Mike, it is primarily that one side of the street that sees the most activity.
The one building.
Go ahead. Sorry, Mike, please.
That's okay. I was just going to say the one building that has kind of piqued my interest on that side is the schoolhouse, and the saloon. I'm just trying to think. The saloon. Where can you buy root beer? That building.
Oh, yeah, the House Hotel.
The House Hotel and the Schoolhouse. Those are the two that have piqued my interest that I would like to check out. Especially, I don't know what it is about the Schoolhouse, but I'm extremely drawn to that place. Investigating. Spidey senses.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, though, James, in regards to what Mike said about wanting to investigate. Are there areas where the energy in Barkerville is stronger than other areas, considering the majority of the buildings, I believe 114 or 104 of your buildings are original?
Yeah, 107. But it is interesting that if it's primarily that one strip, of the one side, because that's almost the dead center of the valley. And as far as like eddies of energy and things are concerned, I mean, one of the reasons Barkerville exists is because the gold always behaves kind of the same way. And where Barkerville is the confluence of 5 different valleys. So they all meet at this place. So all of the heavy material underneath the gravel, like gold, that is traveling downhill is ultimately going to get buried at the bottom of this crazy, huge valley. But it's also why the weather is always unpredictable in Barkerville, because any weather system that comes over that series of valleys gets sucked right down in. But it's also that same thing with the eddies of energy, I have always found. So in those places, I think, where those valleys kind of meet, there is more of an energy buildup, I guess. So yeah, I think that there are definitely pockets, and it makes sense that it's places like the Theatre Royal. I mean, there's obviously historical reasons for it too, but where it's situated in town and the way that the energy can flow around it seems to make some sort of sense that it would be a more active building.
And it's technically on the side of where closest to the gold, like technically.
That's right.
One question I do have: what side did the fire start on? The Mason side or the St. George side?
On the St. George side. Adler and Berry Saloon was sort of beside where now the Wake Up Jake restaurant is, and Moses' Barber Shop, which is a reconstruction. It's actually an 1870s building, but it's been restored to look like Moses' Barber Shop. But Adler and Berry Saloon was pretty much right there on that side of the street.
That's also kind of interesting. The fire started on that side. Were there any fatalities in that fire?
To be honest, I don't know for sure. I have not heard of there being any significant deaths. I mean, I presume that it would be realistic to think that maybe a few people died, but the records are not really extant. Like we don't know for sure everybody who was there at the time before and after the fire. It wasn't quite as well kept as it would be later on. So I don't really know, but from the most that we've been able to gather, there weren't that many fatalities. It was just people's livelihoods that were completely destroyed. Pardon me.
James, has anybody ever looked into the ley lines of the area, or have any psychic mediums come in there to try and give their 2 cents of what is really going on in Barkerville on a spiritual level?
It's funny you should mention ley lines, because I was just thinking about that. I have had conversations with some people about ley lines in the area. I don't know too much about that area myself, but I know enough to recognize what's being discussed. And I do recall that being told that there were some fairly significant intersections there in that valley. And as far as psychic mediums are concerned, there may have been before I came on stream, but I really only ever had Derek with Mike's crew. Anyone that I have physically been in the presence of who've had some kind of experiences that way.
Got a question from Joe here in the chat room. And New Joe is asking, and Mike, this is probably more directed at you. Have you guys ever used inductive mics and or pickups? And if so, have you gotten any good evidence with them?
In Barkerville, we've just used, when we were there, we used basic recorders.
Your Skype cut out there, bud.
In Barkerville, no, we haven't. The only thing we've recorded with in Barkerville, we had 2 Sony audio recorders and 2 Olympus audio recorders. If we go up there again and investigate, all of our gear has been upgraded to the 9s. Like our audio recorders, yes, we'll be able to do that technology now because we have studio mics, like meant for recording music, and they record at different formats. MP3 versus you want to record more in WAV to get a more pure sound. So I can answer that question in full when we try it.
For sure. Appreciate that, Mike. James, what do you like or dislike about the paranormal interest in Barkerville? Now, I know from a business side, any type of publicity is good publicity. However, knowing, and I don't know how well you know the paranormal genre, but there is a lot of people out there who may not do things on a respectful type level. So have you got a lot of paranormal inquiries about investigating there, and how do you control that position?
Well, we've been pretty fortunate. I mean, the thing is, as far as my personal feelings are concerned, I think it's great, and I do understand that there is an element of people who may not be as respectful. Thankfully, so far, most of my encounters, no matter where I've been, that have drawn people interested in paranormal, they've been respectful, which has been great. I know, like, I used to work for another National Historic Site before I came to Barkerville that was not particularly keen on, like, we had a paranormal group come out and they published some findings that actually made its way into the Globe and Mail, which for me, as somebody who was, developing and marketing tours of that site, I thought it was great. I mean, it's fantastic publicity. But because of the nature of it, there was a fear that we would be swamped with people who would be less than respectful of that area. And I kind of understood that. Barkerville, I don't know. There's something slightly different about it. And maybe it's because it's not an enclosed, like, one building that we're interpreting. It's an entire town. So there's lots more room for people to kind of wander about and kind of get the things done that they want to get done without interfering with other people. But we've also, as far as investigators have been concerned, and there have been a few groups that have come out, we've been able to kind of meet them, head them off at the pass, so to speak, meet them first. I always like to make sure that I'm there when investigations are taking place, because it's just for protection of everybody as much as for protection of the town. But I also find that once you start dealing with people on a personal level and show, and I get an opportunity to show my interest, things seem to work rather smoothly. We also have preferred people that we work with too, right? Like, not that we're being exclusive at all, but because, like Mike's group has come up a few times, but, a number of groups that he's been involved in, but Mike has always kind of been a bit of a cornerstone or a lodestone for me. And so, if I'm going to be entertaining multiple offers from a variety of groups to want to come out and do some work in Barkerville, that's great. But I always have sort of the experience that I've had with Mike's team as as my litmus test, right? So I can kind of gauge the level of engagement that we're going to have with another group based on the really positive experiences that we've had thus far with those guys.
Well, one of the things I do at our museum where we do the tour is we've had not many, but a few inquiries about teams wanting to come up and investigate. And I always tell them, one of the trick questions I always say to them is, I work in the paranormal field, and I will be attending your tour. Because normally they're like, no, we don't need you to attend. And I'm like, no, I'll attend because this is the museum and this is the way it goes. And it's amazing how many teams cancel because of that. Because you never know if they're going to try and remove the spirits. You never know if they're going to conjure up something bad. You don't know their techniques. And I use it as a safety question. Because if they do try anything, I can be there to control it. I can be there to say, okay, we're done in here. Let's pack up. You're done. And they don't want that because the paranormal industry is so fickle. And, I don't know if you would use that advice. I don't know if you would think about that. But, I mean, I can say point blank, you guys lucked out having Mike's team come up there. You really did. And I'm not just saying that because Mike's on the air, but I've been with them. I think they do it the right way, the way it's supposed to be done.
Oh, absolutely. I have nothing but great things to say about the experiences that we've had. And again, because it comes from a place of respect. And that's something that we as historians and the caretakers of Barkerville, that's really important to me, that no matter what is going on, that it's done in a respectful way, because we owe so much to the memory of these people. I mean, I make my living being able to tell the stories of these people and the hardships, but also the incredible feats of daring and all the rest of it. So to be able to start from a place of, hey, this is something that we're going to respect, no matter how crazy things might get during the course of an investigation, we're going to come at it from this positive place first. And having that initial opportunity to work with Mike's team just set the gold standard, basically, for anybody else.
We got about 5 minutes here before we got to go to our final break of the night. And I want to get to Ron's question here. The Ukrainian watermelon is asking, and that's what we call him around here because he's in Saskatchewan, and you never trust a Rough Riders fan. You know that. But nonetheless, thanks for the rum, by the way, Ron. Very, very good. Very tasty. We got into that, Mrs. SOR and I, the other night. But nonetheless, he is asking about First Nations. Has there ever been any First Nations dealings in town, or is there any spiritual activity regarding First Nations that you may know of, James?
It's very interesting. Barkerville is what they referred to, or the Williams Creek Valley is what they referred to as a red valley. And that descriptor was used in a place where there was basically no food. Because of the nature of there were no roads and everything at the original time, so there were no moose. The large ungulates didn't come in until after the road was developed. It's subalpine, so there's not a lot of good vegetation. Nothing really grows there. So as a result of that, there was no single First Nations band in the area that had a settlement at Williams Creek. That being said, there are at least 7 local and regional bands that used the Williams Creek Valley and the surrounding area as traditional territory for crossing, for example. So if the Northern Shuswap were coming up through Bowron Lake, and there was a settlement there, an extinct settlement, actually. They were wiped out by smallpox. But, they would cross over the hills in and around where Barkerville is so that they could get down to the area, which is now called Red Bluff in Quesnel, where the Latako Dene had their encampment. So there was a lot of movement in the area, and there were temporary encampments that would be set up at various places surrounding Barkerville as people were doing the movement. And this is all pre-Gold Rush. And then during the Gold Rush itself, there was a tremendous amount of commercial activity, obviously, that was going on in the area. There was a fishery that the Shuswap were running out of Bowen Lake to supply dried fish to the gold camp. There was a lot of once the road, like the wagon road, was put in, a lot of First Nations were driving the coaches and the carriages and the freight wagons to get things to and fro. So there's certainly a large Indigenous presence in the area. But as far as the stories are concerned, I mean, we have just very recently been able to bring on stream with our administration team a couple of First Nations liaison officers, one of whom is based out of the Latako Dene Nation in Quesnel, and we're starting to get more and more of stories from their perspective of what happened in Barkerville and during the gold rush, some of which was not very positive, some of which was very positive. So we're only now just kind of cracking that nut. So I have never personally encountered anything that has screened itself to be of Indigenous origin, nor have I heard many people tell stories of that. It's usually, the stories that I hear usually seem to stem from the population of Caucasian and Asian people that have been staying in Barkerville, rather than the original Indigenous populations that were around.
James, I'm going to get you to hold on. Mike, I'm going to get you to hold on, because this is a lot of fun tonight. We're going to detour. After the break, we're going to talk about wells. We're going to talk about another place along the highway just west. Is it west? Northwest of Barkerville, called Cottonwood. And Mike, we got a question for you coming up in hour number 3 about the alien photo that you got in the 108 Museum post house.
I can try and post that right now while we're on break.
Well, you do that, as we are going to go to break here on Spaced Out Radio. The third Wednesday of every month, we have Mike Morin from Haunted Crew of Canada on the show with me as we talk Ghosts of the Great White North. We're talking Barkerville, British Columbia, a nice, beautiful ghost town. Even though they don't call it a ghost town, James Douglas from Barkerville is our guest tonight. What a fantastic show it is. You're going to want to check out the archives at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. If you've missed the first couple of hours of the show, we'll be back with more SOR in the final hour right after this. If you're heading to Vancouver, make sure you stop by the official bar of Spaced Out Radio, the Moose Vancouver. It's the place to party in YVR at the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is always up to speed with a kitchen staff that serves great food. All food on the menu, $6.95 to $8.95. There's a reason the Moose Vancouver is recognized as one of the hottest spots on the West Coast. Get your horns up for the Moose Vancouver.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Morin. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
On the first Tuesday of every month, I encourage you to come along for a journey with me, Geraldine Orozco, on The Spiritual You. Together, we will take a look at how to access the highest expression of yourself and change your life. Consciousness, ET contact, health, and wellness, we can talk about it all. So come along for a spiritual ride with me, Geraldine Orozco, on The Spiritual You, only on Spaced Out Radio.
We are getting ready to relaunch the SOR Space Travelers Club at spacedoutradio.com. For $5 a month, you can join us for a plethora of features found nowhere else. Hang out in a private chat room during the show and after party. You can check out some exclusive content and a store specifically for you, as well as a private listener forum where you can post your thoughts, stories, and pictures. The SOR Space Travelers Club, coming soon to spacedoutradio.com.
There's news, and there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
Get your horns up with me on Spaced Out Radio. This is Ron Bumblefoot Thal. Come tune in to SOR where you can hear me rock out with Little Brother is Watching, the official theme song of Spaced Out Radio. And then come on over to bumblefoot.com where you can find out about my tour schedule, my music, and everything else. Bumblefoot.com keeps you up to date on what I'm doing and the best way to stay in touch with my music and music camps. Sign up for my newsletter at bumblefoot.com and remember, Little Brother is Watching.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Are you looking to keep up with Spaced Out Radio? What better way to do so than to go shopping at the Spaced Out Radio store? It's a great place to get exciting swag that will make you look good. We have t-shirts, hats, hoodies, and so much more for you to dress yourself up with. All you have to do is go on our website, spacedoutradio.com, click on the store, and get what you want. It's that simple. So come shop at our store, where we can own the night together.
From the mile-high mountains of Colorado to all of you around the world, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I invite you to stick around spacedoutradio.com for Saturday and Sunday nights where I host Spaced Out Weekend. Let me take you on a wild ride of weird and strange topics, from ghosts and ETs to remote viewing, psychic phenomena, and so much more. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time on Spaced Out Weekend, where we own the night.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the show, Jamie Sexton is back with another edition of The Rebel Planet. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. Hello to everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio. Don't forget, all of our archives you can listen to for free. Just subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Loquacious. Loquacious is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. Horns up if you want to listen to Bumblefoot. You can shop at our store, but don't shop right now. I know that sounds weird, but we are rebuilding our Spaced Out Radio store, bringing in a bunch of new t-shirts and swag. It's going to be great, so just give it a couple of weeks. And you can, though, read up on the Encounter Online, our great news section put together by Everett Themer and Captain Gail Shirk. It's absolutely fantastic, so check it out. The third Wednesday of the month, we bring in Mike Morin from Haunted Crew of Canada for a feature we call Ghosts of the Great White North, telling weird, strange tales from across Canada for our plethora of listeners that are not situated in the Great White North. And tonight we're talking about haunted Barkerville. Barkerville is a historic city in British Columbia, historic town and park, and it is very, very haunted, very old. It was having its heyday during the gold rush back in the late 1800s through the 1900s, and we have James Douglas from Barkerville here with us as well. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back.
Indeed it is.
Mike, I want to get to a question from Eric here, and I'm just going to push James to the side. No offense, James.
That's quite all right.
Just letting you know. But during the Paracon a couple of weeks ago, you were investigating with the Ukrainian watermelon, Ron Moniak, as well as David Weatherly, Ross Allison, Jeff from your team as well, in the 108 Mile Ranch area where I do my tour. And you had something interesting pop up on film. Tell us what happened.
We did. It was a private investigation that we took Ross and David out on, and we were in the post house, the one that we always talk about. Most of your listeners know of it, and we had Jeff. Jeff is our audio guy and case manager for the Haunted Crew of Canada. He flew out all the way from Edmonton to come to the Paracon and to investigate. And while we were in the post house, Jeff was all like a kid in a candy store with all of our new gear, and he picked up the full spectrum camera, and he was taking photos probably every 10 seconds, trying to capture something. And so a full spectrum camera, it is the normal lens has been taken out of it, and a full spectrum lens has been placed into there in its place. So full spectrum light and IR light are different ends of basically the color spectrum. Most of the time we use infrared night vision, and this time we were using full spectrum night vision. And for some reason, when he was downstairs in the post house taking photos, the photo came out black and white, but still in night vision. And there was a picture of, in the doorway, I'm just looking at it now on the Facebook thread, of what I never thought I'd say it, because you know how I am with aliens, a picture of like a gray type alien. And I thought it was a spirit, but then I showed people at your Paracon who are experts in the UFO field, and they're like, you have an alien there. James, can you see it? Are you on the thread?
No, he's not.
No, he's not. No, I'll send it to you. But yeah, no, there's a clear as day picture of an alien. I've never seen evidence quite like that in a photo form. And that's the only picture of about 500 photos that was black and white versus full spectrum.
Cool.
Yeah, very interesting. And, going back a year previous, Mike, And I was thinking about this, like, why the hell would there be an alien in the post house of the museum? But if we went back a year when you were investigating the post house with your former team, and one of your team members who claims to be an ET contactee and I were both being pulled outside of the post house to go look on the grounds because we both felt that there was some sort of extraterrestrial pull outside. It was a very clear night, very starry night, a moonless night, and we were being pulled outside. I didn't correlate the two until after that photograph.
Yes, you basically have connected the dots with that. I am less skeptical after seeing this photo. I think we do have something there. I don't think it's paranormal. I never thought of coming out of my mouth saying this, but I do think it is extraterrestrial.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Definitely interesting, that photo. So,
did you ever think you'd hear me say something like that?
I knew it was coming. You know, you just have to want to believe, Mike. You have to want to believe. And that's what it comes down to.
Said it best.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. So, I mean, it's very, very interesting with that. That is for sure. Very interesting. We'll have to monitor that activity more.
Absolutely. And I just sent James the photo on Messenger, and he has a good reaction, which I can't say on the air.
Yes, it's quite striking, actually.
James, does Barkerville, because it is surrounded by mountains, so you probably don't get a lot of moonlight, is there a lot of UFO activity or ET activity in that area that people quietly talk about?
Definitely. I've never had any experiences myself, but I have certainly heard a number of other people, you know, not necessarily telling big stories, and I've certainly never heard anybody suggest that they've had a significant encounter, but the belief that there is visible. I mean, the thing is, like, we don't get a lot of moonlight because of the nature of the valley. I mean, we get it, but it's sort of short. But the starscape is incredible here, like, because there is no light pollution, especially if you're out in Barkerville and you just walk up the street a little ways away from any of the security lights, and you can see the entire sky and everything that's going on in it. So there's definitely been, over the course of the years, people who are pretty sure that they've seen things. You know, I have seen a few things that probably were just satellites, but you know, it was noticeable enough to me that it was a different kind of thing that I was used to seeing in the sky. But yeah, when you get up into these sort of northern climes, especially at the elevations that we're at, people seem a little bit more receptive to the idea that we're not alone. That's for sure.
Uncle Dale has a question. You never know if it's Uncle Dale or his mustache, because he's got one of them beautiful power mustaches. And he is saying, what were they really digging for? Gold or ET fortresses? Perhaps there is a colony ship buried below the site. The entire Caribou area, and I'll answer this, is very, very noticeable when it comes to UFO activities. There are so many UFO sightings in this area, and we're not talking little flashes of light that could be a satellite or you know, satellites up in the sky. We're talking people claiming that they're actually seeing craft, whether it's discs or triangles or boomerangs or cigar-shaped objects. There's a lot of reports up here, and people will talk about it because it intrigues them. And usually there's a lot of transplants in the Caribou region from bigger cities in British Columbia and around Canada, and they never seen anything like that before until they get out of the city lights and move up here where there's no real light pollution. Which is funny because here I am, and I haven't had that encounter in 3 years of living up here. I want to see another triangle or another ship, and I just can't. They're not showing them. They're not. I want to see it, though. Totally want to see it. Let's get to Joe's question in the chat room. And Mike, this one's for you. He's asking, on EVPs, do you get better results with digital or old school tape?
Funny you should mention that. We actually have an old school tape recorder that we've been using quite a bit when we're out on investigations. It's more pure. It's the reason we also use higher end recorders. You can, yes, they are digital, but they record with no filter. A lot of the other cheaper recorders, like some of the Olympus or Sony ones, only record in MP3 format, which condenses and filters all the highs and lows of all the audio, where you're missing that when you're analyzing your evidence. And using an old school tape recorder, or even a reel-to-reel, or even like what I just mentioned, the higher end ones that record in wave format, it's all pure. There are no filters, and you get way more evidence like that. What I want to get my hands on right now is an old-fashioned reel-to-reel and use that for recording. I have a friend that has one, and we did a EVP session with it, and the evidence or the voices you get on that is way more pure than an audio recorder, hands down.
Just make sure with the old tape recorders, man, that you always have shorter cassette tapes. Don't go for the 60 or 90 minutes, 30 minutes max.
Yep, I have. Every time I go to a garage sale or flea market, I'm like, oh my God, they have tapes, and I buy them, all of them. And they're usually, 30-minute tapes, which is perfect. We never re-record on them. They just go in the garbage if there's nothing. Yeah,
well, you can do it once. But anything, you can re-record, if you clean the tape, if you want to get like what they call a degausser, okay, which erases audio completely from the tape. Then you can reuse it a couple of times, but you definitely only want to use it once. And if you could find a 10-minute tape or a 15-minute tape, and I realize how difficult it is to find cassettes these days, that's where you get a lot of really cool stuff.
I totally agree. And we have all this expensive gear in our team, and then when we were up in Merritt, I walk into our investigation with some baby powder, fishing line, a bell, and an old recorder, and my team's looking at me kind of crooked. It's like, what are you doing? But we get evidence with that. Like in Merritt, when I put the fishing line with a bell, we were recording, and you see something hit the bell, and the bell falls off into the baby powder. It happened twice when we were there. And the coolest part of that is we weren't even in the house at that time. We were in an outbuilding when all of that happened. So I find using old-fashioned tape recorders or reel-to-reels, or even the older Lorraine Warren era investigative techniques, I think a lot of that works better than a lot of the gear that is out right now.
I think so too. I totally think so too. But yeah, shorter tapes the better. Shorter tapes the better, that's for sure. All right, my friend. Cottonwood. Mike, tell us about Cottonwood, which is on the way to Barkerville.
It is. Cottonwood is, James, just for historical purposes, it goes Cottonwood. Then there was another one in between Barkerville and Cottonwood. Was it Stevensville?
Pardon me, yeah. So Cottonwood House was a very typical of what they called a roadhouse. That were made, and there were several of them all the way up the wagon road. 100 Mile House, 108 Mile Ranch, that would have been one as well. And they were places for the stagecoaches to stop and water their horses and feed their guests and then move on to the next settlement. And Cottonwood House was originally constructed in 1864 for that purpose, but it continued on its life sort of after the main thrust of the gold rush. The Boyd family owned it for quite some time and used because it's an interesting little sort of delta area of the Cottonwood River. So the ground there is much more fertile. You can actually grow crops and things. It's got a very different feel than up in the hills where Barkerville is. But it was an important piece, stopover. So you're right. It would be Cottonwood House, and then there was Stanley, which was on Lightning Creek. And then there was another town called Van Winkle. So the wagon road sort of skirted away from where the modern highway is now. and then went up over the hills, and you came up to Richfield first, and then into Barkerville beyond there. Now we go through the modern town of Wells from the other direction. But initially, yeah, it was your stops were basically Cottonwood, the Lightning Hotel at Stanley, Van Winkle, and then over to Richfield and Barkerville.
James, you had the opportunity to investigate Cottonwood with us. What was your take on that?
That was very interesting, that experience, and it was great. The caretaker there, Bill, and his family, and the group of employees that came out and spent the night with us there. It was such an interesting and so much more intimate experience than even the Barkerville stuff was, because it's a much smaller site. There was a small group of us that was there, but that house, the Boyd house, where I felt, when we did the investigation there, I really felt a closeness to whatever was going on when we were in there. I remember there being some significant findings, but I also remember going for a walk with you guys and Derek, and the sort of discovery of an area where there was potentially even be some remains of some people out on the path that seemed to line up with some historical events. There was some pretty significant findings at Cottonwood, as I recall.
What did you find there, Mike?
We got a lot of EVPs. We heard a lot of noises throughout the house when we were there. I think it was really cool looking back on it now. A lot of the girls there, they all dressed in period, and they stayed around the table in period. I think they were pretending to set the table in period clothing, and even Bill and his wife were in period clothing. Their son was in period clothing. When we were upstairs in the bedroom, there's a bedroom. We got some voices of a female talking to us. I remember Derek. He was like basically a paranormal medium bloodhound, sniffing out all of these areas where there were spirits that wanted to talk, wanted to speak. And James is right about the historical significance of where he led us on the property when we went for our walk. What were the findings of the Chinese people? Correct.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there was discovered, I think, after the fact, that there had been a small Chinese encampment there, in that exact spot that Derek had led us to.
Yeah, and seeing Derek do that and then getting that validation later, wow, that would be the only word I can think of. I remember Cottonwood was where the judge going up to Barkerville would stay, and yeah, it was an intense place, and that's another place I would like to try with our up-to-date gear, with our audio recorders.
With Cottonwood, was it a stage house, James, for like when I'm on tour with the 108 people or on our 108 museum and people come in, we often talk about these post houses that were set up from the canyon as people rode through the canyon to these little towns and huts that were set up for people to get their horses, fed and get a night's sleep, maybe a beer or a whiskey or something, or a poker game. And prostitution was rampant around the area, so maybe they wanted to sneak a little piece on the side kind of thing. Was Cottonwood a real hub for that when people were coming out of Quesnel, heading over to Barkerville, that they could rest, relax, because the mountains in that area leading to Barkerville were a big push?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was definitely a place of refuge and entertainment and nourishment. But it was also one of several, along that route, from Quesnel to Barkerville, there were several of those kind of establishments and a few other little pockets of buildings that were more almost not quite towns, but little communities. Cottonwood just happened to be sort of one of the more significant ones, I think, partly due to the amount of sort of agricultural activity that was able to take place there, which made it a little bit more significant because it was the place that was supplying a lot of the hay for the animals and the horses in particular. Frank Barnard's BX Express was a huge investor in all of those roadhouses along the way because he needed a place to be able to keep his teams while he was en route. So yeah, it was definitely a center of activity for sure. It was one of the first stops people often record in their journals or letters home, that they spent the night there when they were en route to the goldfields from Quesnel.
Was there gold in that area as well? Or was the main goal to get to Barkerville?
The main goal was definitely to get up to Williams Creek. Williams Creek, as soon as people understood, like, you have to think about the amount of gold that's coming out of the whole area. So there were creeks, there are still claims in the Cottonwood area now that produce gold. Like there is a lot of gold in that area, but that land gets staked up pretty quickly. So people had to keep moving further and further in. Plus, when you consider that to this day, Williams Creek, which again is the creek that runs through Barkerville, is considered to be per lineal foot the most gold-bearing creek in the entire world. You had this incredibly rich layer of gold-bearing gravel at the bottom of that valley that was more than 30 feet deep, and it ran up and down the length of a valley that is 3/4 of a mile long. There was so much gold. Like, to put it in perspective, the Gold Commissioner's Office, in 1896, John Bowron, who was sort of one of the more famous gold commissioners in the area, the Bowron Lake Provincial Park area is named for his family. He, as sort of a legacy project, looked back over the 34-year period of major gold production on Williams Creek, and he took it was about 120 major gold producing claims. So not even just the small stuff, but just the major ones, and looked at the amount of gold that they recorded at the Gold Commissioner's Office during that time. Now, the amount of gold that was actually extracted could be much higher than this. This is just what people were paying their taxes on. But even then, it was $19,320,000 worth of gold in 34 years when gold was worth $16 an ounce. So it's the equivalent of, when you adjust for inflation and everything else, upwards of $10 billion in gold coming out of one 2.5 mile stretch of creek. So that's where people wanted to be. I mean, there are 200 gold-plated creeks in the area, and they were very happy to land wherever they did. But their initial goal was to make it up into that Williams Creek Valley, because that's where the sort of mythical volumes of gold were. Now, of course, the reality of that, once they got there and there were 6,000 people all around them all trying to mine that same gold, a lot of their illusions were shattered, I think, once they arrived at Williams Creek, but it was definitely the place that they were headed.
The attitude of people back then, have you noticed spiritually, James or Mike, in Cottonwood, that attitude continues to this day?
I'll let James take that one.
Well, yeah, I think, again, I'm very new to the whole paranormal investigation part. So, I've always had an interest in the paranormal, but it's really only been in the last few years that I've had any kind of purposeful encounters. But I would say my impression would be that there is the energy of the things or whatever it is that we do wind up encountering. There is a sense of this longing still, like that would be my general impression. Like there is, but that perhaps part of the unrest is the fact that there was this constant motion, this constant, trying to get closer and closer to their dreams. And some of those dreams, like we said, are being shattered as they're on this journey, but there is still this pull, whatever that gold fever is still kind of lingering. in those spots. So yeah, that's definitely my impression.
Yeah, and it's definitely like they're still trying to mine, almost like their dimension is still going from back in that day, that they are still making that run for the gold. James Douglas, do me a favor as we got to start to wind this thing up. Tell everybody where they can find information on Barkerville.
Well, the first and best place to go is our website, barkerville.ca. But we also have a blog, barkervilleblog.com, which has a bunch of interesting articles and other things on it. On Facebook, you can visit us at facebook.com/BarkervilleBC. We're twitter.com/BarkervilleBC as well, and Instagram, same handle. Or you can give us a call. There's always somebody at the end of the line, as long as it's during business hours. 1-888-994-3332.
Wonderful. And yes, I added you guys on Twitter, so hopefully I'll get the follow back. No shame intended in asking on that one. But Mike Morin, quickly, we got about 30 seconds, buddy. Let everybody know where they can find Haunted Crew of Canada.
You can find us at our website, hauntedcrewofcanada.com. You can find us on Instagram, Haunted Crew Canada, and on Facebook, Haunted Crew of Canada.
Thank you, my friends. Ghost of the Great White North happens the third Wednesday of every month. Mikey Morin will be back on with us November 21st. We're going to get to the news with Olaf Phillips coming up next.
This is the winter of our lives. We come to play the final scene. The curtains closing in the darkness we expose what lies beneath.
It is time once again to enter the encounter, our news section that we do nightly on this show, where we talk about the weird, the strange, the WTF of the night, because the news is always changing. That's why we have the encounter at spacedoutradio.com. Go to the news section, and you can also check out paranoiamagazine.com, where the editor, Olaf Phillips, joins us for the encounter once again tonight. Mr. Phillips, how's that beard doing?
The beard is doing well.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. How's your night been, man?
It's been pretty good. How about yours?
You know, we just had a great night. Great show with Mike Morin from Haunted Crew of Canada and James Douglas, who helps run the Barkerville historic town up north here in British Columbia that is very, very haunted. Very haunted. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful town. Like 107 of the 140 buildings on the property are original buildings, staying right where they are.
Dang.
Yeah.
You know, I went to a crazy museum once when I was in Sweden.
Yeah.
It's called, what's it called? I'm trying to remember what it's called now. I'm drawing a blank. But it's in Stockholm. And basically what they did is they went all over the country, right? And they found all these historic buildings all over Sweden, and then they moved them to this open-air museum. And so you walk through, and it's like all these, you know, really old, probably haunted buildings from all over Sweden that are centralized in one museum, and the museum is ginormous. It was crazy.
Wow. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, they have a lot of really cool stories in Barkerville, including one of them where there's apparently like a prostitute in one of the buildings, one of the hotels, where if you put money on your nightstand, you may get some love in the middle of the night if you leave your door unlocked.
Really?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. A little bit of breaking news here as we get into the encounter.
Excuse me. Go for it.
Airman who claimed he saw top secret NASA photos of alien structures on the moon has died in a bike crash. Thank you, Everett Thiemer, for posting this. Former U.S. Air Force Sergeant Carl Wolf, 74, was cycling in Lansing, New York, when he was hit by a tractor trailer, dying of his injuries. Do you know who this guy is, Em? I mean, Olaf?
I've heard the story. But, it actually speaks to a very interesting thing. If you actually look into it, right, there's actually quite a body count of ufologists. People who die under very bizarre circumstances. In the conspiracy world, it gets even worse. But in ufology, I don't remember the guy's name, but one of the oddest that I ever heard was there was a guy, and he was a well-known ufologist at the time. I think it was back in the 90s, early 90s. He was giving a presentation, and he had gotten a Diet Coke, and he took the Diet Coke up to the podium, and they were prepping his slides, and he was drinking the Diet Coke, and when the slides started, he collapsed, foaming at the mouth. And it turns out that somebody had, poisoned the Diet Coke.
How did they know he was going for a Diet Coke, though? What if he would have chose, Sprite or Coca-Cola Classic?
That's a good question. But there is quite a body count, and there's under very weird circumstances. It's quite a thing. Yeah.
That's very weird, man. Very weird. By the way, as we move on, I don't know if you heard this one or not, because pot became legal in Canada today. And on the West Coast, It's still today here. Well, a gentleman in Winnipeg, Manitoba, has the proud honor of being Canada's first recipient of getting a ticket for impaired driving while smoking marijuana in his car.
Boy, he didn't wait long.
No, it was a $674 fine.
Wow, the same day.
Yeah.
That's
same
wild.
day. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. I guess this guy thought, well, I smoke cigarettes in my car, so maybe I could smoke a doob in my car at the same time. And boom.
Lo and behold.
There he is. He is.
It was $674?
Yeah. $674 in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Wow. That's the same day.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's make they blocked out the Winnipeg Police Department. Blocked out the guy's name on the ticket, but they took a picture of it and they said, consuming cannabis in a motor vehicle on a highway. $672 fine must be paid by November 1st, 2018.
He was hotboxing the car as he was driving it down the freeway.
I mean, you got to wonder if Cheech and Chong were in there. You know what I'm saying?
I know. It sounds like a Cheech and Chong movie. That's so funny.
Now, in Manitoba, fines for improperly storing cannabis in your vehicle is $237.
But you see, that's what we talked about. The minute you legalize the stuff, you're already making revenue.
Exactly.
They've already made $672 for ticketing the guy.
Well, never mind the fact that there were people lined up for more than 24 hours to be. I mean, you would have think, you know where you see these stupid lineups where people, like Black Friday or when the new iPhone comes out, there's all the people out there who always have to be the first to have it. And they don't care what the dollar amount is. Remember when the iPhone X came out, people were lined up for like 2-3 days. Well, that was happening at a lot of the dispensaries. That's the word I'm looking for. I got to get used to that word now. And
you do.
Believe it or not, what they were charging for an ounce, if you equated it to the level of gold, you were paying more for marijuana in Canada than you were for an ounce of gold.
That's wild.
Yeah.
You know, I road trip for fun. I take road trips and I go weird places. And I went up to Humboldt and to go see Bigfoot stuff. And when I was coming back, there's a roadside attraction where it's a house made out of a log. And it was so funny because the sign, there's like a store attached to it. The sign was like, you know, I don't know, knickknacks, lattes, hot dogs, and marijuana. They had like put put a sign at the bottom, like attached it over something else, and it's like, you know, marijuana. So you could like go see this crazy house made out of a redwood tree. You could get a latte and buy some weed all at the same place. It was pretty hilarious. I have a photo of it somewhere. Mm-hmm. Good. I think that's good. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There we go. I was having some microphone problems. I apologize. I have to usually... I usually... See, what happens is I got this stupid mute button, and sometimes I press it thinking that it is... that I've actually turned it on, but I've turned it off. But what I was saying is it's a $2,500 fine if you were caught supplying anyone under the age of 19 with marijuana. The legal drinking age, or the legal age, like it's 21 down in the U.S. Up here it's 19. Right. So you can buy cigarettes at 19, you can buy marijuana at 19, and alcohol at 19. So it's going to be interesting. I think that's a very healthy fine, the $2,500, you know. But I mean, the millions that were already generated today, and today alone, it's pretty phenomenal. Pretty phenomenal.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Now the Twitter crowd's all over me about my mute button. God, I hate this mute button. I do. I hate it. I've been trying to get into the habit of just leaving it on because I have a microphone that is directionally sounded. So if I'm doing something over here, like you're not really going to hear like my fingers tapping the desk right now.
Oh, yeah. I cannot hear it.
Yeah, so I got to get used to that. But because I keep my microphone so close to my mouth, I'm so afraid I'm going to be hearing the breathing and all this other people. Exactly. People are going to be like, what is he filming a dirty movie in there or something? I don't know. But nonetheless, let's get to the news. What do you got? Good for ratings. What do you got for our news?
Well, speaking of fines, this comes from Ripley's Believe It or Not, trick-or-treating the law. Believe it or not, in Chesapeake, Virginia, trick-or-treating over the age of 13 could face up to 6 months in jail. The city notes that it will have officers on the streets on Halloween, but they haven't been instructed to specifically check people's ages. Beyond the age limit, the town's 48-year-old law also has a strict curfew on trick-or-treating, issuing misdemeanors for anyone engaging in Halloween fun after 8 p.m.
What's that age again?
13. Anyone over the age of 13 could face up to 6 months in jail for trick-or-treating.
That is ridiculous. Really? How is that even on the books? Like, who is the jerk back in the day who created that?
I have no idea, but it's been on the books for 48 years, and they have yet to remove it.
That is just an absolute waste of time, man. And the worst part about it is...
enforce it.
They are going to enforce it. Absolutely.
They are going to enforce it.
It's like about 20 years ago, there was this RCMP, the head of RCMP in British Columbia, put on a strict enforcement speeding rule that if you were 1 kilometer over the speed limit, you were busted.
You know, in California, our speed limits are like 65. And, you know, I remember back in the day when they were 55, and Sammy Hagar had that famous song, you know, I can't drive 55. Well, they're 65 now. But there's a kind of unwritten rule that you're taught over time that you have about 5 miles an hour leeway. So you can kind of be going up to 70 and they won't really mess with you. But But yeah, that's pretty hardcore if you're 1 kilometer over the speed limit to get nailed.
No, it's ridiculous.
That's pretty intense.
It is. But I mean, getting back to kids, I mean, I liked it when we lived in the suburbs. I liked it when the older kids, because it kind of went in stages. You had the real youngins, the babies who you knew their parents were going to eat the candy. All right.
I did.
But they were so damn cute that you still gave them candy. They always came first. And then the toddlers, and then the elementary school kids. And then it was like a shift. That when you hit about 7 o'clock, that's when the teenagers came. And I was always okay with that. Because you know what? I would sooner have those kids out trick-or-treating for free candy rather than raising hell, doing a bunch of bad stuff.
Yeah. And I always enjoyed the older ones because there's really no BS to it. They come to the door and there's no pretense. They literally put out the bag and they're like, give me candy. And just the honesty of it when you have like a 15-year-old come to the door and it's like, I'd like some candy, please. It's like there's no pretense of an adventure or
exactly.
Look at me, I'm so cute. It's like, yeah, I put on a crappy costume, give me free food.
I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like down there, but up here, usually the teenagers. There's usually one teenager in some half-assed costume that looks terrible. Yeah. Then there's 2 of his buddies who are always with him, who are not even in costume. But they may have a little bit of face paint on. And you're like, Dracula dressed up in a winter coat. That's nice. All right. But you give them candy anyways. You know what I'm saying?
When I was 16... my friends and I, we decided to go out trick-or-treating. And we figured, we'll get some free candy, right? And so, at the time we played paintball and we were into arm stuff. And, you'd expect that from me, right? And so we had fatigues, and our fatigues were, like, complete. I mean, we looked like we stepped right off a military base. And all the patches were in the right places, and we had all the right equipment and all this stuff. One of my friends even had a flak vest, body armor, and it was just really ridiculous. And so one time this one Halloween, I think I was about 16 at the time, we went to this person's door, and we go to the door and we knock on the door and we're like, trick or treat, and this lady is looking out through the door, and she's like, what are you doing? And we're like, well, we're trick or treating, because remember, we're like 16. There's no pretense here, Well, we're trick or treating. We just want some free candy. And she's like, I'm not giving you candy. And we're like, well, wait a minute. We put on the outfits. Let's go. We did our bit. Now you do your bit. Give us free candy. And she's like, you guys just go back to the military base. You guys should be ashamed of yourself. Go trick-or-treat on the military base. What are you doing here? Because she thought we were actually in the military. It was so funny.
Well, you know what?
Yeah, I'm a captain. I'm a captain in the Rangers. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Here's an interesting Halloween fact. In Churchill, Manitoba, where they have a massive polar bear population. Children are only allowed to trick-or-treat for, I believe, 1 to 1.5 hours a night. It is illegal for any child to wear a white costume because surrounding the small town are armed guards. So that way, if any polar bears come into town, they set off the alarms, or they, if they gotta, use their gun to scare away the bear or whatever. But the one thing they don't want children doing is wearing any white on their costumes, because they don't want to mistake the young kids for baby polar bears.
That's wild.
So yes, white costumes, like ghost costumes or whatever, they are banned in Churchill, Manitoba.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Very weird.
That's weird.
We got time for one more story, my friend, before we got to get to the thought of the Dave.
Okay, this is a short one. Again, from Ripley's Believe It or Not. I love these guys. They always find the weirdest stuff. Robot answers hearing summons. The UK Parliament has called its first robot witness to give testimony. SoftBank Robotics Pepper is a semi-humanoid bot equipped with artificial intelligence technology and will be asked to answer Parliament members' questions relating to technology. So now we're calling robots to give testimony in front of Parliament in the UK.
How is that even possible?
I don't know. I think it's truly bizarre.
Totally bizarre.
And the funny thing is that it's not like this robot passed the Turing test. You know, it's not self-aware. It's just going to regurgitate whatever it has in there. It's almost like the Parliament in the UK is like, oh well, we need to make some news, so let's call a little plastic toy robot to answer questions about technology. Toy robot, what is technology? You know, it's like, what are you doing? You're wasting time. But
I guess with a robot though, I guess you have to worry if it's been programmed to lie.
Yeah, because I mean the robot is going to because it's not self-aware, right? The robot is going to respond in whatever way, you know, you have programmed it to respond. It's like I always tell people, you know, you can always tell the quality of the programmer based on the efficiency or efficacy of the device, because the programmer has total control over what the robot's going to do or the software is going to do. If you have crappy software, you had a crappy programmer probably, because the machine just executes whatever code it's given. So it's a dangerous trend. So, you know, then you're doing this because it has artificial intelligence. You know, it's not a human being. So how can it give testimony on anything? You can't trust
I don't even know how that would be legit testimony. I really don't.
I don't either. I think it's more headline grabbing than anything else. It's
kidding.
Just kind of silly. Yeah, a little silliness for you.
No kidding. My friend, we're going to get to the thought of the day right now.
Okie dokie.
Thought of the Dave happens every night at this time, where we post a question on our Facebook and Twitter feeds. Then we read your responses on the air. Why? Because we love the audience participation around here. So that's why we do this. So today's Thought of the Dave is as follows. Can we learn history through the stories of ghosts? What do you think, Olav?
Absolutely. I think you absolutely can. If there's things that are verifiable, absolutely.
I think so.
Why not?
I think so. It's very interesting. If you have the right equipment, the right ability to communicate, and know what to ask, I think you could totally do that. Totally do that.
I think the question is, you know, can you trust it? And that's why I said, you know, if there's nuggets in there that are verifiable, you know, I wouldn't take it as being 100% accurate necessarily, but I think you can definitely, you know, you're going to, at a minimum, get something that's directional that you can look into to see if there's any truth to it. So absolutely, I don't discount anything. I try to just take it at face value and verify it.
Me too, completely. Let's get to some of the responses we have from our listeners. On Twitter, Joe says, I really agree with this because historical research should be part of any paranormal investigation. I've been amazed at the history I have learned that is not in books. Very interesting.
Yep.
Very, very interesting. Let's see what else we got here. Let's go over to Facebook. Tim, possibly if stories and history line up with known facts, why not? Why not? And that brings up a good point. I mean, how much does that prove the paranormal in your mind, Olaf? If you have a ghost saying, you know, I ran the 106B train out of Tallahassee or wherever. I don't know. I'm making up stuff here right now. Just trying to paint a picture. And all of a sudden, you find out that there was a 106B train out of Tallahassee.
That was run by a guy named Bob, and the ghost says his name was Bob. You know, I think that's the Holy Grail, right? That really, you know, I don't scientifically proving that ghosts exist is difficult because the scientific method dictates that it has to be reproducible, and ghosts are not always reproducible. That's just the way it is. You know, it's an enigma. But I think that's the Holy Grail, is that when you get moments like that where you get EVPs where it's like, my name is Bob and I was a conductor on the 107 train in Chattanooga, and you go and look, and lo and behold, in 1947 Bob was the conductor. You know, you're getting a piece of information that came out of midair, and it's verifiable. Now, a lot of people point to that kind of stuff and they say, "Well, that's because you did it." Well, no, you didn't do it. It came out of midair, and so I think that that's really the Holy Grail of ghost hunting and ghost research, is to get those moments where it is verifiable. Because how would you know? I mean, how would that happen? Something had to tell you, and it changes the dynamic.
No, I totally agree. Let's get to some more responses here. Michelle says, and Michelle Hamilton, she's actually been a guest on this show. She runs a haunted museum, I believe in West Virginia as well. Cool. She goes, yes, I have introduced real history to people based on their interests in ghosts. Without the history, the hauntings really make no sense. That is very true. Very true.
Absolutely true.
Caden says, yes, whether it be their personal history or history of an event that happened and how they were involved. Rick states, yes, you can learn a lot of interesting history by reading the profile stories of the people of Plenty of Fish that look like they could be ghosts. Oh my goodness. Sometimes I get in trouble for reading these cold, man. Reverend Keith states, it is possible. However, if it's an unknown history, how do you know it is true? If it can't be verified, then anything could be offered as history. The crypto guru, Ronald Murphy, says, yes, in my book, Haunted History of Westmoreland County, I say ghosts are the bookmarks to history. Indeed, they are. We love the crypto guru around here. Chris George Zuger, with enough legal cannabis, I can learn it from the rug.
I don't know about that.
How do you know he's Canadian?
What's in your weed?
I don't know. Eric Cooper,
but,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm telling you, if you're smoking weed and the rug is talking to you, you're not smoking weed, man.
Oh, I hear you. I hear you there. Coop says, yes, you can. Talk to a World War II pilot when I was stationed in Germany as part of the United States Army. Very cool spirit, actually. Love to haunt the bakery in our town. Sean, I was part of a reality show called Answers from Beyond Battlefield Ghost. No, they didn't tell me anything that would have made a difference. Everett, with the final word, says, I couldn't learn history through textbooks, so yeah, sure, ghosts would work just as well. Nice, that's where we're going to end it. Olaf, where can people find Paranoia Magazine?
ParanoiaMagazine.com, Instagram, Paranoia Mags. Twitter, Paranoia Mag, Facebook, Paranoia Magazine.
Perfect. And you can find The Encounter at spacedoutradio.com. Click on our news section. Great stories there by all of us, including Captain Shirk. Thank you so much for reading on in. Greatly appreciate it. We also want to say a big thank you to Mike Morin from Haunted Crew of Canada, coming in again for Ghosts of the Great White North. Mike will be back on Wednesday November 21st. It's going to be a gooder. James Douglas as well from Barkerville, British Columbia, and the historic site there, talking about the ghost. Head up to Barkerville, barkerville.ca. Tomorrow night on the show, Jamie Sexton is back with The Rebel Planet, where we talk all things alternative on the news. I know you love him, so we're going to bring him back starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. I want to say a big thank you to everybody listening in at home, at work, in your cars, wherever you may be. Special thank you to everybody at hashtag Spaced Out Radio on Twitter. Great snarking tonight on Spreaker. Your participation was fantastic. The Veterans Club of the SOR Space Travelers on Facebook, thank you for joining us. And everybody on Revolution Radio, thanks for sharing the show. Because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Good night.